All right, welcome everybody. Well, we have another great developer livecast here for you on the Game Wisdom YouTube channel. For tonight's cast, we're going to be discussing the game Burden of Command, a strategy game that's also going to discuss the topics of the psychological toll warfare takes on soldiers. It's been in development for a few years now, and my guest tonight, he is the project lead on it, and he's here to talk to us about the game, as well as the research and work they've done on trying to capture what it means to be a soldier in conflict. So please welcome, from the development team, Luke Hughes.
Hey everyone. I want to say right away, Josh, I'm thrilled to be here. I've actually been a listener for quite some years, and it's a particular pleasure for me because some of the people I admire, like Battle Brothers, have been on here, Jan and the Sacred Fire guys, so Poetic Studios, and many, many others. So it's a particular pleasure to talk to this audience and to you.
Awesome. We're getting some little feedback there. I wonder if it's an internet connection. Let's see.
Let me turn my volume down. Is that better?
Yeah, we'll see how things go when you start talking. Let me just get that out there. But
I need to start again?
No, I think we're good. We'll see what happens. It could just be lag or something on this end, but let's see how things go. But
I had your window open, and that was a mistake, so I closed out the video live stream. That was creating problems.
All right, we'll see how things go, and for you folks watching, let us know how the stream is doing. But
is the audio better for you now, Josh?
I'm still hearing...
I speak in tongues, so it could be me.
Still hearing some static. I just wonder it could be something on my end too. Let's see. I am getting good stream here. All right. Let's see how things go, and hopefully we'll adjust accordingly. But again, thank you for the compliment, Luke. It's always great to talk to developers who've had a chance to see my work and enjoy it.
I'm just trying to soften you up so you don't ask me too wise of questions.
Well, we'll see what happens. But it is great to have you on. I know we have a lot to discuss here. I think we're still hearing some stuttering. I'm going to lower... I'll try lowering some of my sound on this end. And hopefully this will be the perfect night. Just for those of you watching this, I just discovered that my mic was muted when I did a recording earlier tonight. So an entire video I did, fortunately it was only like a 20-minute video, but unfortunately no one heard me for that. So that will be some more work for me to do later this evening. But
party down.
But to get things rolling, for people watching this, Luke, could you talk a little bit about your background when it comes to the game industry?
So my background, well, I'm a classic indie. I don't have a formal background in the game industry, except I did do a board game that will be out eventually on World War II. So I've had some experience in game design, etc. I've been playing since I was 12. I'm not talking about how old I am. I'm 22, obviously. And also I have an unusual background, which is a research background in psychology, neurophysiology, and actually user interface design and so forth. This will allow people to beat me up when the interface is terrible later. But I spent a lot of my life around high-tech computing and what was the best for human interfaces. So that's a relevant part. But you'll have to judge the book by its cover or the game by its play here.
Great. So very interesting with your background when it comes to things outside the game industry. I'm still hearing some starting on my end. I'm going to Luke, if you wouldn't mind turning off your video for us, I want to see if you answer the next question, if that will help with the feedback or anything.
Okay, hold on. I could recall. Is that a bad idea?
We could try it. Let's see what happens.
Let me turn off the video for a moment. We'll see. We'll see how technically proficient I am here. Okay. Did that kill the static?
Let me ask this next question, Luke, and we'll see how it sounds. So, I guess when it comes to the game industry or game design, is Burden of Command the first game that you've had a chance to work on?
Yes, it is. In terms of digital, I've done a cardboard.
Okay.
How's the sound?
It's still sounding a little bit staggy. Let's try. Let me try calling you back.
You get on a different device.
Maybe. Let me try ending the call. I'll give you a call right back. We'll keep the stream up and we'll see how it sounds. So, talk to you in a second.
All right, I'll wait.
Oh, don't you love live stuff, right, folks? Alright, let's see. Oh, that's not good.
Hello?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right.
Everything's good on my side.
Yep, actually, it sounds good right now. I'm not hearing any static.
Awesome.
It looks like very little, but we'll see how things go. I wonder if it's a Skype thing or my thing or who the hell knows, right?
Ether.
So, with that said, change that picture of yourself. That's my old picture of stuff. We have to. I have to someday update that. But with Burden of Commands, you said this is your first digital video game. You worked on tabletop games in the past. So,
And I should say, by the way, that I lean on all the team to do the real thinking, since a lot of them do have game experience.
So, with with Burden of Command, were you there from the beginning, or were you brought in like after the game started development?
It's my fault. So I thought of it, and I built the team, and basically, it's my show for better or worse.
All right. I guess when it comes to Burden of Command, I figure let's get this question out of the way now because it will kind of inform a lot what we'll talk about. For people watching this, what is the elevator pitch of the game?
Oh, well, I'm so happy you asked that. So, if you walked up to me and you said one word, Luke, I'd say leadership. If you said, what's the sentence? I live in Silicon Valley, so I've been beaten over the head about this for years. So my sentence would be emotionally authentic leadership RPG. And then I'd wait and see if you were still in the elevator or you'd push the exit button. Do you want me to fill that out a bit?
Sure, go for it.
All right. So what's new? Well, I hope all that was new. Meaning, I think it's hard to think of leadership role-playing games. There may be a few cardboard one. Well, it's just very tricky to find those. And then the other one is what emotionally authentic. So let me explain that. What the hell is a leadership RPG? In a nutshell, I'd suggest it's Band of Brothers, except if you're Captain Winters. So we want to put you in the boots of the captain in World War II, like Winters was. You're in charge of an infantry company. It's not made up in the sense that we follow a real regiment called the Cotton Balers. And we have the historian who's our official historian, John McManus, behind us, making sure we stay honest. The Cotton Balers are famous because they're the regiment that's been in the most campaigns in the U.S. So they go through some little campaigns that people aren't, not little, unusual campaigns people aren't used to. Morocco, Sicily, Italy, southern France, not Normandy. You're not going to see the hedgerows. And then on to Germany. So it's an unusual campaign, and we put you in the boots of the leader. And the second thing I'd say is emotionally authentic, right? So what does that mean? Well, Call of Duty. Let's look at Call of Duty. Call of Duty, is remarkably authentic sensorily. When you get in and you play, you feel like you're on the beach, relatively speaking. Thank God not too viscerally, but it's pretty close, right? So where does it break down? I think they did a great job of authenticity in many of the details. Where it breaks down, for me at least, outside of being a fun game, it's obviously a fun game, is death. So death is easy. Death in Call of Duty or games like it is basically an inconvenience, right? It's been annoying while you reload, and the reload's damn fast, so it's not much of an inconvenience. Further, death of others. Well, first, a lot of them have plot armor, right? So they're not going to die until the allocated time. But it's really that since they're not going to die and you can reload, who cares? Well, that's antithetical to what we want for emotionally authentic, because real soldiers on the battlefield, and we have a lot of vets on the team, they don't want to die, and they don't get a reload. So, when you say, oh, run up the hill, and conquer those Germans in a bunker, they're not too keen unless, you're a good leader and you've set it up right, and then they might play lip service. So emotionally authentic means respect for death, in a nutshell. The other kind of game I'd point to, and then I'll stop, and for your next question, don't want to go on too long, is, there are a lot of games on war, namely war games. Now, I don't think we're a war game, and I'll explain why. There are leaders. There's a famous board game called Squad Leader, right? And obviously it's about leaders. So we draw some inspiration from them. But typically, board games are about strategy and tactics. Yes, you have leader pieces, but really it's about maneuvering and winning a scenario. And our goal is to get away from the dry strategy and tactics and get you into the human experience. That's where I'd go back to Band of Brothers. I think most of us care quite a bit about Captain Winters and his subordinates by the end of that series, and it matters to us how their lives go. And Our goal is for you to care about your lieutenants as a captain. And sometimes you're going to have to send them into harm's way, but you hope they don't die and you don't get to reload.
Hmm. And that's very interesting. We've seen in other strategy games, I think most notably the XCOM series, that people do develop that attachment to their characters. We see this with games where when you're able to create a personality or create a unique look for a character, it allows you to sort of become emotionally attached. I've seen plenty of people who name XCOM characters after
Yes.
friends and family, and then
Yes.
the heartbreak of failure or yelling at them when they miss that close range shot. But I don't think we see a lot of games. I'm sure you may be able to enlighten us a little bit more about this, Luke. We haven't seen too many games that try to build that emotional connection within the game space itself. Because, like I said, normally it comes from the outside. It's the person bringing in that emotional investment rather than the game trying to make you care about these characters.
Well, Josh, that's the essence. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
the key for us is to create the empathy we're going to feel in this quote, emotional authenticity. Nice phrase, but you got to deliver. So you pointed right away to one of the game design principles. XCOM does do a superb job of that, right? They let you personalize, they let you level up. In fact, any role-playing game, that's why this is a role-playing game, not only because you role-play, but because we want you to connect. Role-playing games, you get attached as you invest in the character and they advance in the ways you described. But we wanted to go a little further than the classic role-playing. And by the way, I would point to things like some of your audience will be familiar, like Panzer General, which is kind of a weak, or Panzer Corps these days, weak wargaming RPG, and that your units gain experience. I remember the first time I played that, I renamed all the units, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I started to care about them as they gained, and I didn't want them to die, and I admit I reloaded sometimes. But we wanted to go a little further, so that's why we got Chris Avalon, the famous game writer. In fact, he got a nice game coming out today with Into the Breach. Chris Avalon involved, and Alexis Kennedy, Sunless Sea. We also got a very famous novelist, William Bernhardt, who sold millions of copies to give us advice. He's written whole books on empathy and memorable characters, and he playtests for us, which is pretty much an incredible privilege. So I'll tell you one or two tricks. Would you like to hear one or two empathy tricks? I'll blow my secrets.
Sure, go for it.
So, Chris, I hope Chris isn't listening today as I leak on one of his tricks. So I think he's talked about this one. This is a really, really clever trick, which is when you playtest, you watch people and you watch what they say. You ask them to verbalize, or another trick is you have somebody with them, so they're talking to somebody, so they say out loud what they're thinking. And what he said he would do is when they see the player say something like, "Oh man, that character is so annoying. John is so annoying. I wish he'd shut up." He writes down, finds character annoying. It's scene 32. Lo and behold, scene 31, right before you're feeling like saying, "What an annoying character," one of the other NPCs says, "Man, John, you are so annoying." Suddenly you feel empathy, right? Because you feel the connection. This person understands. So that's a trick. Another trick is, I'll steal William Bernhardt trick, is he wrote a book on these kind of issues, is make characters sort of very extreme in their human appeal, but then make them human. So an example is Superman. Superman wouldn't be particularly appealing to us if he was strictly super. So what you want to do is you want to make him vulnerable, kryptonite. You also want to make him do things that are charming right away, like help a kitten early on. Now, you have to be a little subtle about it, but essentially you want him to help a kitten so that, hey, this is a decent guy. He isn't just a superhero, right? So we use a lot of tricks. I'll give you one more now in the spirit of burden of command. There's a fine war novelist out there who's written a book called The Things They Carried. It's a wonderful collection of Vietnam short stories. I recommend it to everyone. And what are the things they carried? Well, he wrote basically an essay. He was a Vietnam vet as well, on what's in the backpacks, right? So, sometimes it's just, and what are you going to find in a backpack when they're dead, or they're not, or they just sit down? What do they carry? Picture of the girlfriend, picture of the wife, picture of the child, maybe the book that they want to write someday and the notes for it. Who knows what they carry, but it tells you a lot about it. He wrote a very moving piece about the things they carry. So, of course, we're going to take a little advantage of that. Now, I don't want to strip us down to make tricks, but to boil it to an essence, I hired two well-considered, well-reviewed on Steam interactive fiction writers, Paul Wang and Alan Geese, who have some experience narratively as writers and making people care about characters and be invested. And the final trick, of course, is you get to make decisions, right? So you're not just watching the Band of Brothers. You're the one who has to actually decide to send them up the hill. So that might generate a little sense of responsibility.
And from a few comments in chat, also was talking about the idea of having permadeath. That's, of course, another major factor.
Thank you.
And
thank that person. I'll pay you after whoever said that. That's absolutely right. Permadeath is essential to this, right? Also, you want it to continue across the scenario. So, the scenario's over. What you'll see in board games is people they'll make extreme actions at the end of the scenario to win, because who cares if these units die?
Yeah.
So obviously we want things to persist, and we want permadeath.
Yeah, but persistence, as you just said, Luke, that's another major factor. It's the same thing we see with XCOM as well. You can't just end a mission, gung-ho, send your guy straight into a chrysalid or a muddin and let him kill him, but then you're out that character. There's that kind of persistence, and the same thing goes for, as mentioned earlier, Darkest Dungeon. It's such a key trait of basically keeping this campaign alive. That's not just, one stat conflict to another stat conflict. Who cares about that in between the two? I'll just have, if I had 10 guys on this mission, I'll have 10 more guys on this one. But when you have that persistence to it, it adds a lot more, and again, it adds that weight. And as you said, Luke, it adds that investment on the player's part to keep these characters alive and keep them going.
Well, now, World War II is a particularly interesting problem for that, in terms of what you're speaking about, which is post-XCOM, which is, I suspect some of the number of followers are pretty historically knowledgeable. I mean, the attrition rate in World War II for junior officers is pretty brutal. I mean, extremely brutal, really. And especially in the first few days when they know what they were doing. So some war games refuse to allow persistence. We're not a war game, but it's a relevant analogy. Refuse to allow persistence of units across and leaders across scenarios, because they say the attrition rate was so high. And that's historically accurate. So how can I defend our game? Are we a BS game where people don't die, at a historically accurate rate? My answer to that is there are two forms of truth here. One form of truth is a physical truth, which is the casualty rate was high. I agree with that. I can't argue with it. But there's another form of truth, which is undeniably men and officers, and I focus on officers here because most games cover the enlisted, and we cover the enlisted too, but the officers are not typically paid attention to. The real officers bonded with each other and the men. They were decent people. Now, how did they do that? Well, because they spent a lot of hours together not fighting in a battlefield. As you may know the quote, war is mostly boredom with a few moments of sheer terror. Right? So a lot of the time they're just in the canteen or trying to not be wet or sleep or having they found a bottle of wine, they're drinking it. You see a little of that Band of Brothers. So I don't really want to put the players through, 20 hours a day of relatively boring interactions. We do some of that, actually, but hopefully not boring. A little paperwork and so forth, but mostly not. So therefore, we compensate by lowering the attrition rate to a little ahistorical so that you can experience the emotional truth, which is, a sense of bonding and empathy with your men. Because we keep physical attrition and we don't give you the boring times, you won't feel the connect.
Now, here's a question, just to clarify for people coming in a little bit late. With Burn Up Command, is this a real-time strategy, or is this turn-based or a tactical strategy?
This is turn-based tactical RPG. Okay. So, why is it turn-based? My deep intellectual reason is because I like turn-based. Probably a little easier, too. Slightly more seriously, we want you to think a little bit about these issues. Though there has been some discussion of timers like Telltale Games, and we probably will playtest that eventually for certain decisions. I have mixed feelings about it, but we'll see. Right. I think the audience has had feedback has been mixed. Some people like it, some people don't. So why is it a tactical game? Well, I'd say leadership is on and off the battlefield, right? So we're certainly going to give you off the battlefield, like you see again in the Band of Brothers analogy, where you're dealing with the personalities and people in their lives off the battlefield, and the stress they're going through and their outside lives with their maybe the people back in the States and so forth. But of course, in the end, your leadership is pretty damn key on the battlefield. So we really want to focus on what I'd call a psychological battlefield. So the emotional authenticity is not just the relationships off the battlefield, but on the battlefield. So I'll give you one example of that. So trust. So, units gain experience, but you as a leader and your subordinates gain trust. How do you gain trust on the battlefield? So think of this as an XCOM. Think of this as psychological XCOM, right? How do you gain trust on psychological XCOM battlefield in World War II? Well, one of the ways is you risk your ass, forgive me. Meaning, you're up there taking fire with the rest of the guys. Men notice that, right? Soldiers notice that. On the other hand, if you're up there taking fire, this is a psychological battlefield, so suppression happens. Suppression means, hey, people don't want to die. If they're getting shot at, go play paintball. Paintball's nothing. When you get shot at paintball, do you stand up and get whacked? No, you hide, right? And you peek out and you take little shots. The real battlefield's a lot more serious. So you can guess what? People don't stand up when the fire is going on.
Yeah.
So you get suppressed. So you're going to be a hero, right? You're the player. You're going to go up to the front so you can build trust. Well, guess what? You're probably going to be suppressed too, which means you won't be as effective. Maybe a smarter commander wouldn't be up so much. Maybe you'd be a little further behind the lines, a few hexes back, so that you're not suppressed, you're not taking fire, and you can give commands. Because in the end, maybe the soldiers would appreciate you organizing the battlefield so that they succeed and don't die. Yeah, thank you for dying with us, Luke.
Yeah.
But maybe we would appreciate it if you led. So I hope what I painted for you is a challenge on how you balance trust with sort of, quality leadership in the sense of guiding the battle.
Yep. So from what you're saying, Luke, like the person playing the game, they're going to actually be like a character like represented on the field. It's not like XCOM where we are, the quasi omnipotent, overseer, over commander of everything.
Yeah, good question. It's both. So you have a specific personal avatar, which is you, and you are on the battlefield. But you also are in control of your subordinates, your lieutenants, and you move them around. But they may have opinions at times. But you control them in an XCOM-like way, as well as the squads. So it's squads, which are about a dozen men each, but represented as a single unit. Then there are individual leaders in the battlefield, which include you and your subordinates, and of course, enemy leaders.
Now, in terms of how combat plays out in Burden of Command, Luke, like as we mentioned a few minutes ago regarding permadeath and that tactical layer, when you're playing a game like XCOM, pretty much any mistake you make is going to be heavily punished. You put a character out of position, chances are they're going to die that next turn. With Burden of Command, in terms of, I guess, the difficulty or that level of punishment, where are you aiming at in terms of, I guess, balance or challenge with the game?
Yeah, this is very interesting because the true battlefield is very complex. So what do most, and I've done a lot of reading on that, and we also get, our historian McManus gives us a lot of advice from his background. He's written books essentially on experience. There's one called Grunt's Experience of the Soldiers throughout many wars, modern ones as well as the world wars. And there's a great book I recommend, Brains and Bullets, about the psychology of warfare at this level. A lot to be talked about. I'll go through some of those examples. But specifically, in terms of the punishment, well, most games treat fire as aiming. So Call of Duty, picking that for a moment, right? So a lot of it's about aiming, right? Getting a headshot. And even games that are more wargamey, there's a lot of it's about put enough fire on them till they run away, or you hit them, they die. But real warfare, at least small arms, in World War II, and actually to a large degree modern too, is not like that. So there's something in World War II, something like 8,000 bullets per casualty. And remember, casualty does not mean death. Casualty means wounded. 8,000 bullets. And I think in Afghanistan and Iraq, it's even radically more. It's like 20,000 to 40,000. I'd have to check my stats. So what does it tell you? Actually, leaving aside artillery and mortars, which are pretty lethal, casualties are physical casualties. If you behave coherently, meaning you don't stand up in the face of the machine gun, you're not going to die that quickly. So what does that tell you in game terms? It tells you that actually if players learn to not walk out in front of unsuppressed enemies, then you don't just die instantly. So the game, strangely enough, the battlefield is somewhat forgiving. So you have to play a different kind of tactical game, which is you have to suppress enemy, which means you put a lot of fire on them so they keep their head down. And when they're sufficiently suppressed, you basically try to flank them and close on them. Again, this comes back to real battles. So you have to motivate your men to cross the field. You think they're suppressed. If you're wrong about that, or somebody you didn't see, then there's a problem. You walk across the field, or you run across the field in the open in the game, people will die. So, but if you've done it right, then they're suppressed. And what's really interesting is nobody wants to fight hand to hand, right? So when you in the real battlefield, we all think it's dramatic, right? They go on up in the ancient days and they fire, they do Like
Pull out
Napoleonic, they were far.
swords, bayonets, all that, and just start,
Yeah,
mashing
no,
each other.
no. What typically
No.
happened, and World War II is no exception, is when one of two things happen. When you get either you're not willing to get close, or when you get close, the enemy surrenders or they run away because they don't particularly want to have people sticking swords or daggers in them, right, or
Yeah.
bayonets. So that's my short answer. Short answer is if you behave coherently. I mean, outside of things like I keep mentioning artillery, you're not going to have as much casual random death, though there is some.
Hmm.
Which I hope you see points out a game design problem, which is we probably don't want a lot of scenarios where it's all about being bombarded by artillery because we want to be at all authentic. You're going to get a lot of random death,
Hmm.
unless you're in a bunker.
And a quick question from chat. Oscar is asking regarding dealing with trust. He's saying dealing with enemy leaders on the battlefield can up the trust of your squad and have a direct impact on the enemies as well. And can that work against the player? Like, will the enemies have their own way? Will enemy leaders be able to, like, I guess, manage their side against you, or is the AI going to just be like kind of like it controls everybody evenly? I guess.
If I understood the question, will more trusted leaders behave differently?
Yeah, like, will the enemy leaders will they bring, I guess, like a sense of personality against you when you're
Ah,
battling them?
I don't want to oversell it.
Okay.
So maybe in future versions, I hope so. Probably the AI has not been written in any detail yet,
Hmm.
but the AI will probably behave pretty consistently, but taking into account the ratings. So
Hmm.
just to be a game designer, so I should say something about my background. My background is professionally is AI, so artificial intelligence. So I unfortunately know how hard that is, but I can tell you that they will be dynamic. What does
Okay.
dynamic mean? Is when the leaders look at the battlefield, they're not going to follow a script in a rigid sense like step A, look for an enemy, fire at him, step B, run men across field. They will have ideas like that, but they will score the battlefield. So, like real humans and animals and soldiers, we're reacting constantly. So they will threat assess. So that's a fancy way of saying the enemy leader is going to say, "Holy cow, Luke has a machine gun squad and it's not suppressed. I'm not running across the field with
Hmm.
my men." Right? So he will assess the threats and make adjustments dynamically to the context. So that's one thing we think of as intelligence, which is dynamic response to the environment. I
Yeah.
definitely will do that.
Yeah, but
But
I'm a.
not personality differences, not them. I should say one more thing to the
Mhm.
great question though. Your non-player characters and you will have mindsets. So we have a blog I recommend that the writers wrote about the RPG side of this, which is you can pick mindsets as you go through war. So I don't want to drone on, but I could talk about how you develop mindsets in your sort of emotional and spiritual journey if you want, but I don't want to keep going unless you ask.
A follow up from that, his question to, I guess, to elaborate was, if you deal with like the enemy leader of the battalion or the company that you're fighting against, will that kind of end the battle early? Like, if I
If you deal with them.
yeah.
Very good question. So, very good. One of the problems and good things is, yeah, if you manage to off the enemy leader, you've got a decisive advantage. And inversely, I'm already seeing that as I'm playtesting. And inversely, if they off some of your NPCs, things degenerate quickly. So one of the game design problems is,
Hmm.
you know, we advertise, hey, the enemy leader's over in this hex. Guess what the player will do? Bang, bang, bang at that hex, right? Because
Oh
even though I
yeah.
don't kill him, I'm suppressing him. So the enemy leader will typically not be visible. You can make educated guesses. I think maybe he'd be in a center squad, but maybe that leader's playing a, in the rear
Hmm.
strategy, meaning not directly up front. I'll probably do that mostly for the enemy AI to give it a chance. Doesn't have to be quite as trustworthy heroic. It's probably not playing for the long term the way you are.
Hmm.
But yes, leadership is decisive. And the way I think about it uh, is this way. When you go on the battlefield and there's no fire, everything works well. Everybody does what you say. You order them down the road.
Hmm.
They do what you say, right? It all works great. Guess what? When people start firing, chaos breaks loose. And people don't do what you say. So one of the key things is you give orders and people may not do them, not because they're bad people, because they don't hear it, or they're suppressed, or they don't think that's a good risk right now, so they're going to give lip service to it and not really go for it. So the battlefield starts to go chaotic. Things start to break down. And that's where the leaders come in. So I'll give you a nice anecdote from Brains and Bullets. Left to themselves, if you ask like a squad of guys to charge across, If they're deciding to charge across the field to assault, nobody wants to do that, remember? It's about 20% chance, some of the evidence, that they're willing to do it. Now, if you put a leader with them, like an NPC, I'm sorry, a non-com, like a sergeant, goes up to about 40%. If you go to somebody they particularly respect, like a senior sergeant or a junior officer, goes up to about 70%. And suddenly they lead. So the leader makes things happen. And I'll give one more example, and then I'll shut up again, which is personal for everybody. I don't know how many of you all have had CPR training. So one of the things you get in CPR training is person's lying on the ground. I've experienced this personally. They're bleeding. What people do, it's called, I think, diffusion of responsibility. They all stare at each other because they're also shocked, like, oh, not because they're bad people. They don't know what the hell to do, right? And they start panicking, and they're social animals, so they're looking around. What do I do? What do I do? CPR says what you do is you say, you, go find help. You, get him, close the wound there. You, help me with his arms here, etc. Notice what I'm being now. I'm being a leader. I'm giving people direction. Suddenly, everybody moves. Everybody does things. So it's sort of crowd phenomena, crowd psychology. So the battlefield's the same. If you stand up like winners, some of you all may remember from Band of Brothers, and you kick people in the fan and you say, we got to go, and you're standing up and taking a risk, they'll probably do it if they trust and respect you. So, leadership is about overcoming that chaos and making things happen. And so, yeah, if you get rid of the leaders or you suppress them, then their ability to act goes down. Similarly for you.
Interesting. Again, I can already tell there's going to be a lot that we can talk about tonight, because this is definitely a very fascinating topic that, again, it really feeds into a lot of different disciplines. Psychology, game design, just the human condition in general.
Oh, it is fascinating. Yeah. And there's a wonderful podcast series, not as wonderful as yours, of course, called Hardcore History, Dan Carlin. And he's fascinated by people in extreme situations, throughout history. And battlefield's extreme situations. So we have a term for that. We call it crucibles. So writers thought it's a wonderful concept, I think, which is critical moments when you decide who you are as a leader, right? So I'll talk about that briefly for a moment. I'll give you a crucible if you want. I have a crucible ready by chance today. So let's start with a crucible example, and I can talk about it. So this one we call Lethal Insubordination, and it's from history. So one of the things that's fun in this game is history is much stranger than fiction typically. So it's things you wouldn't believe all the time. I remember we put in front of Chris Avalon this example, actually, I'm about to read you. And we went through it, and we said, what would you do? Like I'll do with your audience in a moment. And he was thinking, he was, wondering about it. I told him what really happened. And I said, guess what? That really happened. He went, oh, my God. So that was a hint to us. So we put in little markers like, this is what really happened in this situation after you make your decision. Well, now let me stop talking abstractly and read it to you. So friendly artillery, now this is from the writers, but this is roughly what happened in real life. Friendly artillery pummels the enemy. And imagine this is popping up on the screen. Suddenly your sergeant shouts the order to advance without so much as a glance your way, and definitely without your command. Now, everybody think you're the leader here, you're the captain, you don't get to pass the buck on this one. You bark the counter order. The men stumble to a halt. Your sergeant turns, bleary-eyed from drink or shock, and repeats his own command to the men. The barrel of his rifle shifts with a dreamlike slowness your way. Now here are your choices. Shoot him, or he gets my men killed. You might lose your sergeant doing that. Well, you obviously lose the sergeant, you're shooting him. Sergeant, now's not the time for an advance. You might have morale loss, you might have some squad casualties. Sergeant, I am in command here. Trust -2. Even chance of being shot. Knock the weapon from his grasp. Low chance of being shot. Now, nice, well-raised children like many of us, we're going to do decent things, right? We're going to knock the weapon from his hand. We're going to reason with him. We're going to do something moderate. Well, the real lieutenant in this case shot him dead. And guess who the lieutenant was? You may remember the maniac who runs across the open against the Germans in Band of Brothers, Lieutenant Ronald Speer, a man I would say had a little bit of zeal. Remember, the Germans were so shocked when they saw him running across the battlefield, they didn't fire at him. Because he ran across the field in front of them, grabbed somebody, I forget what he was doing, and then ran back. And they were like, oh my God, this guy's insane. They didn't shoot him dead. Same guy. And he actually reported it to his higher command, and they did not decide to court-martial him because they felt there was due cause for this. But, okay, so how's that for stranger fiction? He shot him dead.
Damn.
So I hope you get a sense of the crucible. There's a crucible. What will you do? Are you going to be zealous? Are you going to be compassionate? Maybe you understand this guy. He's bleary-eyed. Maybe you need to try and pull him back from the brink. What's your mindset going to be? Who are you going to be as a leader? There's not
Yeah.
a right answer. I don't know if shooting him dead was the right answer.
Hmm.
It's an answer.
Yeah, and that's always one of the more interesting aspects when it comes to that kind of decision making in just about any video game out there. I know I've written about this several times. I'm sure you have thoughts on this as well, Luke, about the challenges of presenting things in that shade of gray. We've seen plenty
Yes.
of video games go for black and white choices. Like one of my favorite, I guess, infamous examples would be like a lot of stuff I see from the BioWare games, where the choices are either comically evil, I kick a puppy or I steal money from an orphan,
Yes. I
or
want
I
the good
am,
track.
yeah, or I'm purely good, I'm going to trust everybody 100% of the time, no matter what. And the choices are always weighed in on that scale. So you can do, five bad things, and then you do five good things, and, you're still neutral. It doesn't matter what you did during those five bad acts or during those five good acts. And it's very hard to convey, again, how to make choices matter over the long term as well as over that short term. Because, again, like in a Bioware game, I can, steal money from someone, but how does that really define who I am, 10 to 15 hours down the line?
So we have some opinions on that. Do you hear background noise? I'll go close a window if you do. That's generating a little background. Are you
Uh,
okay or not?
I think I'm good right now. I'm not hearing anything.
Okay.
For you folks
All
watching,
right.
let me know if you hear anything.
Okay. So first, there's a really interesting trend in games to make these situations more complex. So the ones I like to point to as examples are this War of Mine.
Hmm.
So, which is about civilian experience of war.
Yes.
Really interesting topic. Probably most of y'all know it. I recommend it if you don't. Well, I remember I went to the door. We were huddled in our building during the war, and a child was at the door, and she said, "Can I have medicine for my mother?" So I'm a good guy, right? So I gave her medicine for her mother. I turn around. One of the NPCs barks, text window,
Hmm.
text thing. "Oh, I'm so glad there's a few decent things, going on in this war we're doing." I'm like, "Yes, I am the
Hmm.
moral leader here."
Hmm.
Somebody else says, "What the hell are you doing? You're responsible for us, and we need that medicine to live." Something like that.
Hmm.
Oh my God. Well, I wonder if I made the right decision. Who's my first responsibility to? So that's a wonderfully gray. What's the right answer? Other examples, papers, please, right?
Oh, yes.
Maybe you do the right thing, about helping people, but yeah, you also have a responsibility to your family, which of course tough regimes take advantage of. So that's my first point, which is we love these kind of complex decisions, and our writers revel to a slightly a
Hmm.
sadistic level in trying to generate those. We play test them with our vets and our regular gamers and other types of people and our writers, professional writers, to see if they do seem painful. One of our questions is, was the decision tough? So
Hmm.
we're not trying to make it easy for you.
Hmm.
But go back to you. What are the tracks? I don't think there's a good track in Burden of Command, nor is there a bad track. What we do is we give you minds that you choose. So if you think about a novel, what happens in a novel when characters develop? They develop certain minds of the world. Maybe they become cynical. Maybe, like Lieutenant Spears, become more and more zealous as a way to cope. People in a war have to find coping strategies. And sometimes cynical is a good way to handle it, because if you're not, we all think cynical might be bad, right? But if you're cynical, then you give yourself some armor from the terrible things you're witnessing, and you might be able to continue as commander because you've distanced yourself. And the bleeding heart is very sympathetic,
Hmm.
might break down earlier.
Yeah.
On the other hand, the compassionate bleeding heart might be the one the men believe really cares about their interests, and they'll follow. So do you notice I didn't define the right track? So you pick what, and I'll give you a few more of the ones we had: zeal, cunning, idealism, professionalism, discipline. And these will influence not only how you deal with characters off the battlefield, but what you're good or bad at
Hmm.
on the battlefield. So we'll give you a narrative journey, like a good novel, we hope, that is a series of mindsets, so that at the end of the game you sort of found who you were. And that it wasn't you were a good person or a bad person. You were a person who developed certain ways to deal with the situations.
Hmm. And again, that's always a lot more fascinating when it comes to the moral side of decision making. Again, the moral side of war and conflict. And as you said earlier, when we talk about games like Call of Duty or the more extravagant side, these questions really don't get answered. They really don't get shown. And again, in Call of Duty, the most serious question or the most serious choice you have to make is, do I try and headshot this guy now, or do I, go for a kill streak or stuff like that? And
Now, I want to be clear, by the way. It's a fun game,
mhm,
and I confess I play many fun games. So I'm all for fun games. Is Burning Command fun? Is this War of Mine fun?
mhm.
I don't know, but I'm glad I did this War of Mine. It's engaging,
Mhm,
right? And so our goal with Burning Command is to be engaging. You may not always go to it as your fun game, but
mhm.
we hope you go there. And what we really hope is, like the people you have here today, is that we'll hear conversations among people and debates about, well, in that lethal insubordination example, what was the right decision? I mean, it's very interesting for us to have real officers and the playtesting and so forth, and enlisted who've had their own experiences. Some of them are combat vets. And one of the things, let me talk about this briefly. One of the things they consistently point to as important in burden of command is the core burden of command. Now, audience maybe wants to guess. I can't see your responses, so this is sort of a rhetorical device, but type it. What do you think is the central burden of command, at least to these vets' standpoint?
All right.
So,
We'll see
uh,
what the people answer in the next 10 seconds. I guess while we're waiting for that, going back to what you were just saying regarding how you have these different tracks based on what choices you make over the course of playing,
different mindsets,
different
yes.
mindsets. Does this mean, like, let's say I go more towards, like, let's say I'm heavy bleeding heart. Let's say, like, from
Yeah,
50,
compassion.
60 compassion, like 60, 70% of my choices, I am being compassionate. And then let's say at one point, I want, do a complete 180. Does the
Mm.
game lock choices based on your previous, like, if you go too far or if you go very far down one track, does that prevent some of those other choices that would be considered, like,
I have the suspicion,
incompatible?
Josh, that you have thought about the art and science of game design. Something tells me that. Yes, excellent question. Echoing many debates inside the team, and our current position is that, and there's Alan did a blog on this. It's the Crucible blog. I think it's 3 or 4, and our position is that as you go further down a mindset, you get more and more benefit, say, from being a compassionate guy. I think it's protector is what we call it. But it gets more and more stressful for you to try to shift off protector to some other. You can't suddenly go, we always want to min-max. We always want to
Oh,
pick the
yes.
best game-winning choice. Well, if you become a really cynical guy that gives you a lot of protection from stress, say, you can't just go magically pick the idealism choice. Well, you could. Our current view is you can pick it, but you will pay a price. We don't really like to block off a choice. But you can't just willy-nilly, oh, today I'm feeling like the love kid. Oh, tomorrow I'm the cynical killer. You're making choices.
All right. And again, like, it's always tricky. I mean, this next question I'm about to ask you, this could probably fill an entire podcast, but it's always tricky when you're trying to, I guess, quote unquote, gamify real life like this when it comes
Mm.
to games. And, like, I remember Sid Meier, I think it was in the game Sid Meier's Pirates, the remake. I remember reading a part where they were talking about the decision to introduce scurvy to the pirates in the game, and he wrote that that is a real thing. It happened during the age of
Yeah.
piracy, but would it be
Yeah.
something we could make compelling within that game? And they decided to remove that in order to keep the gameplay engaging, keep it interesting. And with something like with Burn of Command, I'm sure you and the rest of the team have also had those lengthy discussions about at what point at what point does realism get in the way of what we're trying to represent in game, and at what point does realism as actually the solution to what we're trying to represent?
Well, these are great questions again. I mean, so we could go on a long time. First, realism has many benefits to us, which is when you open the door to what the real accounts tell you, which is that let's go to the burden of command. The core burden of command in the officer's view is your responsibility for others' lives. Right? When you open that door and you're responsible for others' lives and permadeath, things get pretty interesting pretty fast, right? If you've done a good job on the characters. So in that sense, realism here, emotional authenticity makes our job easy, like this War of Mine, so forth. On the other hand, what's real? Let's be, I don't want to false sell here. Realism, real life, there's a lot of boredom, right? You're sitting around, there's a lot of paperwork. In fact, I'll give you an example debate. So we don't give you a lot of paperwork. Big surprise, because I don't really think people want a war boredom simulation. We are, we're like a movie. We do pick the more interesting ones, but we try to pick realistic ones. like a good novel. Novels don't tell you he got up and ate breakfast, right? And then he ate breakfast again the next day, right? They pick and choose. So I think a novel is a good analogy or a good narrative game. So, but paperwork, right? So I had an argument with Paul. Paul wanted, a mandatory paperwork scene. But papers, please show that paperwork decisions can actually sometimes be interesting. And he persuaded me that it was an interesting scene. But what we decided as a design philosophy was that the more problematic, realistic ones, and maybe not everybody would want to do, we make optional, and we'll signal you. So, people, there's some really interesting studies on gamers' natures, and playtesters, we have them take the survey that's very empirically based in their nature. Some people are very into the immersion, right? They really want to go into Naples in between battles and experience what wartime Naples was like in Italy, and maybe have some adventures of a realistic sort there. Some may not be too pleasant, by the way, because they weren't. Some may be quite nice. But others are like, no, man, I'm a battlefield commander. I want to skip that and get to the battlefield. So we give you some choice. We do force some things because, this is not a war game. We're not just trying to give you it draws in a wargaming tradition. I love war games. But we draw on that for the battlefield. But this is not a war game. It's a leadership role-playing game. So we're very focused on giving those experiences on and off the battlefield. And some of them need to be non-order the men forward to be a real commander, just like you see with winners.
Mm-hmm. And going back to what you just said, Luke, regarding the amount of, I guess, focus the player will have, or where their focus is on the game. That's another very interesting topic. For instance, the other day, or for those of you watching this record, probably a few weeks at this point, but I was trying out Assassin's Creed Origins, the Egyptian one, and I was trying out their Discovery Tour mode, which just basically gives you all Egyptian history within the confines of the game.
Yeah.
No combat, no stealth, the entire shebang like that. And I said during that recording that, this is not going to be for everybody. And I'm sure, as you're aware as well, Luke, that there are going to be people who are going to play Burn of Command just like they play other action or strategy games. They're just going to go through battle to battle. They're not caring about, the historical context. They don't care about that. But for the people who do, and with the Discovery Tour, I thought that was a really great side. And it's very tricky sometimes to balance just who is going to be your core audience for a game like this.
Yeah. Well, I think the answer is there's no one core audience. So I did a lot of management in my life, so sort of civilian leadership, and one of the things I learned, a couple of things to say on what can be learned, and one of the reasons I'm very interested in this topic. One of the things I learned is people are different, right? So I remember I had a guy who worked for me. He was so decisive and so energetic. I realized the best thing I could do was to get out of the way. And I had another one who really needed direct instruction to be successful. So it varies. And one of the Marines in the team gave me a book early on from von Schell. Am I getting it right? He'd been a German captain in World War One. He taught the U.S. Marines, gave lectures between the wars, went back and became a Panzer Corps commander in World War II. But he gave some really interesting lectures on battle leadership. And he gave an example. He said, this really good German commander, and good in the sense of effective, basically had three subordinates. And one of them pretty much wanted to do the opposite of whatever he told him to do. Another one, really wanted to spit out, and the other one wanted to step back. So when he talked to the guy who liked to contradict, he pretty much kind of said the opposite of what he really wanted to happen. So the guy could say, no, you're absolutely wrong. We must do this. And that would work. Right, so you manage to the different personalities and people you're dealing with, and that's the same with the gamer. So to draw it back to the point, I wish I could remember his name right now. The guy who does what's the fighting game with the word honor in it?
For Honor.
Thank you. For Honor. He's a really great talker. Go look at his GDC talks, and he talks about all the variations in gamer personalities. And as I alluded to, I can give this a link afterwards. There's this gamer survey. As I said, we have the players do it, and they're very different people. Some people are very into creative. Creative means they want to go and mess around in the sandbox, and they're pissed off if you have to go through the linear sequence. Right? The other people, they really want to be the mastery guys. Mastery guys, they want to be on the field in charge of everything, and they're pissed off if they aren't in control. Right? They don't like chaos. Right? which this game could be a little tricky for the mastery guys, unless they're willing to lead in the face of chaos. But if they want to be in control of everything, this is not their game. I'll just say that right now. So I know that part. But what we try to do is give enough room for what we understand to be the different types of personalities. And the other thing we'll do when we get feedback is we look at their type, and so it's not going to shock us when the creative type says, I didn't like being railroaded through this. Right? Good. We understand that type doesn't like that. But that doesn't mean everybody doesn't want. Other people say, I want a strong narrative structure, right? So not one size fits all, but obviously certain things will appeal to certain kinds of people more. But we're going to give them space.
All right. Now, let me see. Yeah, time-wise, we're actually still doing well. I know there's still a lot more we can discuss. Now, here's a question that I wanted to ask earlier, but I think this could be a good time to kind of just like put in kind of as like an in-between. But what attracted you, Luke, to World War II as a setting for Burden of Command compared to other conflicts and other settings?
There's a straight answer to that, which is when I grew up, my parents were both in World War II. So my father was in the Pacific, and my mother was a nurse, and so it was always personal to me. My father was an historian, professional historian, so history is always of deep interest to me. I'm Southern, so Southerners, at least when I was growing up, tended to be very interested in Civil War and so forth, so I started reading military history early on, Appomattox, so forth. And then, a Time Life book of World War II, the pictures. So it was kind of in my family background, and when I was growing up, that's what you watched for the World War II movies, right? And then I would say, moving to more modern times, Band of Brothers was a couple compelling things that made me want to do this. One, Band of Brothers. Oh my gosh, I just thought they did such a wonderful job of respect, in terms of trying to tell the truth about it, but not making it all bad. It's not cynical. Not everybody's a killer. That sometimes, bad things are happening. Not everybody's a saint. It's complicated. You would say shades of gray. Mm-hmm. Further, I remember somebody asked Tom Hanks, why do you have those weird helmets on the German guys you're fighting in Normandy? And he said, well, those are the paratrooper helmets. And they said, well, why'd you bother? I mean, who cares? 99% of your audience won't notice. He said, well, it was respect for us, right? We wanted to be as truthful as we could to the situation. And one of the real privileges we had, which still blows me away, is Eric Bork, who was one of the writer-producers for Band of Brothers, actually did a dev blog with us. Our last dev blog, he did it with us, talking about this issue of respect. So I'm like, God, what an opportunity. So Band of Brothers had a lot of influence, but that doesn't mean there aren't many other interesting wars. I mean, the wonderful thing from Burden Command standpoint, from the writers and snare designers, is this is pretty untouched, relatively speaking. So, I mean, there are many things that can be done in modern that we have to be very careful. Vietnam War is obviously very interesting on the psychological fronts. Mm-hmm. We've had people pushing us for World War I, and then all the different nationalities in World War II. We're doing the Americans first, so not an easy, obvious campaign, but we're going to do the Germans. We'll probably do late war. That's very tricky, obviously, doing the Germans. And my sort of short version on that one is, as you're a captain in Germany in World War II, late war, first you're probably starting to realize this war is lost, right? Mm-hmm. If you're intelligent. And secondly, not too fanatical, you're starting to wonder, maybe you're not on the right side. Maybe you were never on the right side. Very tricky, right? So there's some really interesting books in it. There's one called the German War, which is what was the psychology of the Germans? Why did they fight? Were they all super Nazis? Just had to be Nazis? It's much more complicated than that. So we hope we'll bring some of that out. It'll obviously generate some controversy. Another one will be, sorry, there's a little noise in the background, would be, how about the Soviets? Right? Mm-hmm. So what if you were a commissar for the political officers in war? Their job is often to pretty much pull a gun and say, you better fight or else. Now that's kind of a papers, please military role. So very tricky, right? You're working for an authoritarian regime. You don't have a very pleasant role, but very complicated. Now, a little more positive, it'd be fun to do the free Poles. I've had a lot of admiration for the Poles who, were conquered in 1939 and by the Germans and fought on. Got over to London, fought for the RAF, fought the rest of the war. And Americans don't have the experience, Southerners a little bit, but being a conquered people. The Poles were conquered people, and they still fought on. I think that's a pretty interesting psychological story. So there are many wars. is where we're starting for the reasons I mentioned, and partially, where I come from. But we hope if we're successful, uh, we'll have many more. And we've had a lot of suggestions. It's been very interesting suggestions.
Mm-hmm. And
I hope, by the way, people listening will make more. Please come to Twitter or Facebook. We're here and we listen. We keep a document of all the suggestions that have been made.
Mm-hmm. And what you were just saying there, Luke, regarding some of that the respect of the history and trying to display these things. I mean, for those of you watching this, we're going to be discussing a little bit more probably in the next few minutes about the storytelling, the research that goes into this, as well as into game design in general. But that's one of the more tricky topics. I know in the post I wrote a few weeks ago, I mentioned that it's very hard sometimes to show, what really happened and try present in a way that it doesn't look like you're either glorifying the good, or I'm sorry, glorifying the bad, or trying to exploit the good. Now, I guess with that said, for those of you watching this live, if you have any questions for Luke regarding the game design of Burden of Command, please get them in the next few minutes, because we'll be moving on more towards the storytelling and the research side. I would say maybe in like the next 5 to 10 minutes. I'm not sure how long this next question I have for you is going to last. But one thing that I wanted to elaborate on that we didn't talk about earlier in this cast was the persistent element of Burden of Command. As in, how does the campaign structure of the game work in terms of, like, what happens to your troops who you keep alive, or what happens if you start losing a lot of troops over the course of playing through the game?
So the campaign layer will be thin, because we're a small team. We got a lot of people on the team, but most people are part-time. We're about 2 or 3 people effectively, so we can't do everything. Future versions, but it will be there. It'll kind of be, you'll be pulled out abstractly, do some troop management in terms of who gets replenishments, things like that. The writers will put you through some off-battlefield scenes, but it will not be. You will not have the Earth satellite view of World War II managing where you deploy all your bases. But back to your question. So, as I said, characters can die. Luckily for a narrative game, the reality of the battlefield is that the nature of it is, you don't just, it's not as much about shooting people dead, bang, bang, right? So people can survive. They're not doing stupid things. But sometimes it requires you to stand up as a leader. Those of you who watched the teaser video, just to digress to a real world example again, there's one in there where it asks you, would you step out into the open to draw fire from a sniper so that your troops can spot them? And of course, we can all guess the risks you're taking there. Well, the amazing thing is that really happened. This incredible Lieutenant Colonel in the Cotton Balers, Heinke, I can't say his name right. He stepped out. I mean, he stepped out to draw the fire so his men could kill the sniper. It worked out, but oh my God. So if you die, the short answer is we we do have replacement officers waiting in the wing. The level of development will be limited. We do develop them because we can only do so much. And if you continue to kill off your shouldn't laugh. If you continue to kill off your lieutenants, then you will be relieved eventually. So there's a loss condition. But this game is not about winning the scenarios, right? It's not about winning. It's about your leadership. Now you have a moral. Let's go back to the burdens. One burden is the laws for your men. So you have a responsibility to keep your men alive. You're a decent person, but you also have a moral responsibility to win, in the sense that you should accomplish the objective, right? Because you'd like the war to end, right? Because you want to conquer the Nazis, and you want to end this war. So there is a moral motivation to do this scenario. But if you may remember, Band of Brothers again, winners, late war, the canal. They sent a guy over to grab a prisoner. Comes back, everybody's very relieved. They got back with a prisoner to accomplish the mission. Winter Superior says, "Great, go do it again." Now, Winters has to decide, is he going to win this scenario? Is he going to get another high score of prestige and do it again because he's such a man? Or, no, Winters decides that maybe his responsibility now is to the lives of the men, and he basically lies. Let's not be too cute about it. He essentially lies and says they did it again when they didn't. So, we hope this is about your journey as a leader. It is not about you're trying to win the scenarios, except that is part of your responsibility as being a leader. And give you a couple more burdens on that, in spirit of that. So Nasty Allen put me in this unfortunately realistic situation in Sicily, which was, the Germans have taken shelter in a farmhouse with civilians. What are you going to do? Right? You're going to kill the civilians? Or you can play it safe. You can bomb the hell out of it. Civilians will die. Your men will be safe. You could take a few more risks for the sake of civilians. Now, some of the listeners may think, well, Todd, this is war. Just flatten them. Well, just so you understand that the real leaders don't always make those decisions. First, we all know that modern warfare has a lot of these kind of decisions, unfortunately. In Iraq, Afghanistan, etc. World War II had it too. Maybe not as pervasively. But, for instance, in Morocco in 1942, one of the generals, in the morning, he had to make a decision. Was he going to bombard the French town? We were fighting the Vichy French, who were collaborating with the Germans at that point. We had landed. And a lot of civilians would have died. And the obvious military decision is bomb it. But he decided not to. Now, part of that was probably, I hope, was moral. Another reason was they were probably trying to get the Vichy French on their side to come over and become free French. So, you don't want to kill a lot of French when you're doing that. So we will also put you in those where you have to balance, what are your objectives here? So burdens, just to sum up, one of them is the lives of your men. Another one is the burden of your moral responsibility as an officer for the war. Another one is the burden of civilians. Another one is burden of the enemy lives. Again, I seem to be on a Band of Brothers rush tonight. Remember when he sees the enemy standing in the field and Heinlein shoots him dead, but he has a moment of contact that looks him in the eye. So, sometimes you have to decide when is the right time. When are you going to take the surrender, when you're not going to? And the Americans often did not take the surrender, and they often did. And it's very complicated. It depends on the battle. And I'm not singling out the Americans. Pick your nationality. But it's very complicated when you decide to take surrenders or not, because sometimes taking surrenders might get your men killed. And sometimes, you're putting too much risk, and sometimes the people who are surrendering aren't honest. It's very complicated.
Yeah, and I think one of the challenges, as you said earlier, regarding the dynamic nature of the game, is being able to present this in a way that the player doesn't always know, what's going to happen. I mean, this is another major part that we see in a lot of games that tend to fail in this, and that the choices always have the same results each time. If I choose to be good at this point, this guy will always betray me. Or if I choose to be bad at this point, it's always going to go out this way. And that dynamic nature is such a very important factor when it comes to trying to make the player think about what's going on versus, as we said earlier, that min-max attitude. I mean, for people who watch me, when I play a lot of strategy games or RPGs, I tend to do that min-maxing. I go, what is the best possible result? Yeah.
It's hard to resist. I'm a mastery guy. I like to win. So, now, I don't want to oversell again. This is a sort of interactive fiction based to the things. It's like Shadowrun, to use a different example. You make choices. Often some of the same things will happen. But what we try to do is mess with the underlying model. So the effect of this may be to change the trust of your men, or your experience level, or your stress level. So, yes, this outcome happened from your bombarding the farmhouse in Sicily in terms of literal, but the ramifications for you in the battlefield may be different because you have changed and your men's relationship to you may have changed because of that. So the battlefield is relatively dynamic. The story choices, are scripted, but their effects are dynamic in terms of who you are. Kind of, back a little bit to this War of Mine, though that's a more sandboxy, but it changes your relationship, the stress level of people, so forth. Now, my hope is in a version 2 will try a full sandboxy. We'll have a large library of events that pop dynamically, but I think you should think of this as story-driven in the spirit of Shadowrun. I don't want people getting a false illusion here. And there is a story. We do follow it. The choices are limited. There are intended consequences of choices, but underneath it there is a dynamic. And further, there will be our intention is to have at least a limited library of dynamic events that pop randomly on the battlefield that you will get, other people won't.
Okay. Now, one question that I had that I was just thinking about, Luke, just to elaborate for people watching, in terms of the tactical layer that you're going to represent Burn of Command, are we going to be commanding individual soldiers, or are we commanding squads of soldiers? What level of granularity are you getting at with the game?
So the granularity is squads.
Okay.
And then weapon teams, 2 or 3 guys in machine gun or mortar or something, and individual men, which is you and your subordinates.
Okay.
Now, there's some really interesting games to try to go down to the next level. Like, as you may know, there's a remake of the very popular in the 90s Close Combat
Oh
series.
yes.
And it's coming out again the Bloody Firsts this year, and they model every soldier individually, which more power to them. So I'm not against that. For simplicity, I have some board game influences. I like the simplicity and clarity of the design of the squads, and I will defend it at this level, which is, remember I talked about diffusion responsibility, right? That everybody's standing around wondering what to do when the person's bleeding. But somebody does something, everybody suddenly does something. Same thing in the battlefield. So what you'll tend to see is crowd phenomena, right? One person gets up and starts following winners, everybody gets up and starts following winners. Inversely. So here's another anecdote. So everybody's fighting, somebody goes back to get ammo. They're not being a bad person. They're going back to get more ammo. Somebody else says, oh my God, he's running. He's leaving. I'm not sticking around. And suddenly, everybody's acting like a crowd, right? So I will defend a sort of notion of group squad in the sense that men and women do behave as crowds often. But, the perfect world, it would be individually modeled plus group phenomenon. But we're a limited team. So I think both are valid takes on this.
All right. Very interesting. And again, like you can see in different games how this affects that level of decision making, and also affects the complexity of the title as well. Now, speaking of which, that actually gives me another really good question for people watching this right now, either live or recorded, Luke. In terms of, I guess, the complexity that you're aiming at with Burden of Command, again, when it comes to the strategy genre, we can see games go every which way. Like the XCOM or the recent XCOM games are more on the board game approach. You mentioned, of course, Close Combat, and I have tried my hand many of those war game or the quote-unquote grognard level games, and they are just beyond what I can do at the moment.
I'm so glad you asked that question. I feel remiss for not addressing that myself. I need to make that more something I bring up every time. My personal ambition, the team's ambition, is sort of XCOM spirit of design. I have a deep admiration for the clarity of design of XCOM, like any turn-based person does these days. And there are sort of, now this is psychological XCOM, right? It's not just XCOM. So we're going to do quite a few things differently. But in terms of clarity and simplicity of design, that's our ambition. Now, we will not be quite as simple as XCOM because, look at XCOM. Individual soldiers, not that XCOM's simple, individual soldiers, and that's what you do, right? And they fire and shoot, and they have special abilities. But we have to have a leadership layer. So we have an inevitable next layer of complexity. You have the sort of squads, which are like the individual soldiers in XCOM, and then you have the leadership level, right? So you have to coordinate this. So instantly, it's more complex. But having said that, my intention is to be as clean and simple as design as I can manage because I want to reach a larger audience. Like the thing I always sit here and say, since I'll just mention Band of Brothers for the 700th time. My brain must be fixated. Band of Brothers had millions of people watch. Now that tells me that, and not all wargamers, since wargamers probably don't number quite that large, right? So obviously many, many people, men and women, like Band and Brothers. Now, what is the typical audience of wargamers? Pretty thin. Grognards, as you said. Not tiny, but relatively speaking thin. That tells me that there's a potential here. So our hope is that there's a large group of people who are very interested in what? The human side of war, as well as some of the tactical like XCOM. Our sort of market is, we do want people who want to play XCOM, right? So if they just want to do interactive fiction, this is not the game for them. But what's been very encouraging is, for instance, when we first did the release of the teaser, there was a woman online commenting, she says, I would never normally play a game like this. I might play this one. We had another person who is an interactive fiction person said, again, I don't really do things like this, but I'm finding so interesting the archival nature of capturing these lives, because we are capturing real lives from the cotton balers in World War II. You do meet real people. We base in real situations that they're interested in that level. So our sweet spot's sort of the XCOM players, coupled with the people like story-driven RPGs, and sort of tactical story-driven RPG like a Shadowrun and so forth. And then I hope that people like this emotionally authentic like This War of Mine. But this is probably not, Sim Farm. Or pick your more casual analogy. I'm blanking on the Farmville one I want, right? So, but we do want it to be simple. Oh, and last thing I'll say is I'm a very big believer in not trying to be too smart, meaning I like feedback. So we do a lot of feedback on the fiction, and we're going to do a lot of feedback on the tactical play. And remember I talked about categorizing people. We're trying to get we have a pretty good base of people who volunteer to play tests. Very gratifying. We have a fair number of people who are not a large number of people are not wargamers, but then a large chunk of people who just aren't hardcore gamers at all. And I'm particularly interested in them. They're going to be in my core playtesting, in that I want the people who really would never play any of the more grognardy games, like maybe you, Josh, except you're a little busy, I think. And those people I'll pay the most attention to. If I can get them connected, that's going to make me happy. Not everybody, but the people who be willing to play Shadowrun, XCOM, etc.
Very interesting, and I like your approach there, Luke, to trying to make the game as accessible as possible in terms of its design and storytelling, instead of just going for that hardcore audience. Because as you said, there are people who are very dedicated to the war game genre.
But, yes, some very principled people in terms of their detail understanding.
But it can be very easy for developers to just cater too far to them. That can make it very inaccessible to new players. Like, another really great example would be the war or the grand strategy games from Paradox Software. I mean, those games, there are people who will play them for years on end, and they will never get bored of them. And then, like, there are people like me who try to get into them, and we're just basically deer in the headlights trying to figure out what the hell is going on the screen.
Well, you're saying Paradox games are a little complex? Yeah, I agree with you on that. And you should have seen them in the early versions. But, we do, on the other hand, what's very interesting is a large draw of something like Crusader Kings. And why are the people playing that? They're not playing it necessarily to conquer the world like, Europa Universalis. They're doing it because they love the family story. Right? In fact, my wife got a little weirded out when, what are all these babies crying in this game you're playing? Because I kept having babies. Oh, I'm just having more babies, honey. But the family, that was actually a core inspiration for Burden of Command on the game side, which was I was playing Crusader King. And I suddenly thought, oh my God, what if you followed a family of officers, a band of brothers across the war? Wouldn't that be interesting? But that's a human story, right? It's not a 4X story. Crusader Kings I don't consider a 4X. It could play it that way.
And naturally is a good segue to the question I was asked earlier in chat. Besides, of course, we mentioned Papers, Please, and XCOM earlier, were there any other games that inspired you with Burden of Command, either from a mechanic or storytelling point of view?
Well, I want to call out to the board game tradition. So I grew up with board games. They've had a tremendous renaissance. Go to Board Game Geek if you don't know what I'm talking about. I mean, heck, some of these Kickstarters get millions of dollars now for board games. I mean, not many of them, but a lot of them get like 500, 600,000. It's kind of crazy. So big renaissance in board games. And board games, I think, are a great inspiration in terms of the clarity of design. XCOM paid a lot of attention, I think, to some of those board game-like designs. And they've been, I think, a good font of innovation because it's cheaper to do a paper experiment, right, and see what's working than it is to do a digital experience. God, it takes a long time to code games, right?
Oh, yes.
So, and debug. So, therefore, they could advance faster by experimenting a lot of 1,000, board game designs bloom. So, what I'm pointing to here is I want to call out some of the board game designs. The original one is Squad Leader. And John Hill, who invented that, now that's a war game, but it was very leader-focused, obviously. Though tactical. It was tactical. It wasn't a human story game, except insofar as you created them. But what was interesting, what John Hill said? He said, Squad Leader is basically Dungeons and Dragons on the battlefield. Meaning, if you didn't have the leaders and the individual guys, and you didn't have the machine guns like dragons, and so forth, it'd become a bore. So he was very conscious of trying to create a sort of role-playing like experience from that, and they create a lot of the sense of chaos, importance of the leaders. There've been a lot of other board games. There's one called, I know this audience is probably more digital, so I'll just use one more example. But there's one called Combat Commander, which is all about chaos. I mean, things are constantly not going the way you planned, constantly. But what's fantastic about it is you get a story you didn't intend. So, good stories in games come from having good writers, and the other ones from things you didn't intend to happen. I mean, those Crusader Kings are just full of, oh my gosh, then this happened, and then my sister did this, and that happened, because the engine is really good at creating chaos. Interesting chaos, right? They don't say, oh, you had a bad bologna sandwich. They might say, oh, you had a bad lunch that killed you, or poisoned you. So their pool of chaos is, betrayal, adultery, power grab, gluttony, right? So they make the story good. So we don't casually pick our chaos for the battlefield. So that's what I picked. But on the digital side, This War of Mine, for really making you feel like you're there, and the gray areas. XCOM for the clarity of the tactical design. The Shadowrun for Banner Saga is another one to bring out as a good sort of analogy, story driven with tactical. Crusader Kings in terms of the whole notion of individuals embedded in history. Let me think other designs. Oh, Darkest Dungeon. So they were one of the early pioneers, and I'm particularly thrilled that some of the Tyler, he's following us, which has been really exciting. Darkest Dungeon. They're pioneers in saying, hey, you know what? It might suck going into the dungeon.
Yeah.
You might actually be a little stressed by fighting undead creatures, and horrible things. And I think people are pretty interested in that, plus the fantastic art. So that was a big inspiration, right? That there's a psychological journey here. And then I think some of the other ones that are nice is like Battle Brothers. I'm really glad you had them on. I recommend anybody who doesn't know them. Very interesting tactical play, plus psychology of the battle. It's really great. There in Battle Brothers, and definitely I'm thinking about this for us, but somebody takes a terrible wound. Everybody around them says, "Oh crap," and you can see their morale drop. And some of them may run. It may not be the enemy side; it might be your guys.
Yes.
Right. So fantastic, right? So and Papers, Please, right? So these notions that we are not. Power players running through shooting everything dead, but we're fragile human beings. We're sort of a cobbled together mess of animal spirits, full of, fear and ambition. And like one more thing, I'll shut up again. Is why do soldiers sometimes get up and take life risks? One of the reasons is because they don't want to be embarrassed, right? They don't want to show the yellow feathers, it used to be called, or white feather. They don't want to be embarrassed in front of the guys. I mean, sometimes really they love their brothers or sisters and they want to protect them, right? But some of it is they don't want to be humiliated because we're social animals, right? We care about what others think about us. So the psychology of it, so psychological games, and I probably left out a few today, but those are some. I'm always interested in suggestions. Somebody wants to pop out from audience and tell me games I should be looking at. I'm always interested, because design is the art of stealing. I mean, being inspired by.
Yes. But yeah, really great list of games there, Luke. And I know my audience right now, they probably all their ears perked up when you mentioned Darkest Dungeon. That was one of the first major Let's Plays we did on the channel. And again, I had a chance to.
I didn't know that. I missed that episode.
Oh, fantastic. That's like a.
Did you do it before when they were kickstarting, or after they went famous?
Oh, geez, I've interviewed Tyler and Chris several times.
Really? I gotta go look those up.
Yeah, they should be archived on the Game Wisdom website. But
Fantastic.
I spoke to Chris, then I spoke to Tyler and Chris, and we did a live play with Chris when he got to watch me die on the Darkest Dungeon. That was perfect. And
hey, I'll volunteer, Josh. If you want to die and burn the command, I'm willing to, watch and convince. Oh, you really shouldn't have done X.
Yeah, there we go. Perfect. Maybe we can do that at some point. You can watch me play the game.
It'd be really cool. Never occurred to me, but wow. I hope some YouTuber, I'll suggest a YouTuber. Wouldn't it be interesting to have a few vets? Because we have some who are willing to help, come on and make their commentary on what they would think about or what a real commander. Boy, I'd be fascinated to attend that one. We get their feedback through, surveys and so forth, but wouldn't that be interesting to have a live stream with some vets?
Yeah, that would be interesting and see, how, again, the gamer mindset versus what actually happened. Because as you said earlier, truth is stranger than fiction in a lot of these cases.
It's insane. I'll give you one more of those, right? So remember I told you that German von Schnell came and talked to the Marines between the wars? So this is a true story, but you wouldn't believe it. In fact, one of our criteria is we say, we're going to watch like Chris Avalon. When the players say, oh, please stop the Hollywood moment. That's when we're going to make sure there's a little button down there if you want to see the real history. So here's a Hollywood moment that actually happened. So these German soldiers in World War I are taking artillery fire. They're all starting to freak out because they're just standing around and maybe going to take casualties, and they're not doing anything. Soldiers hate being passive. They like to be hiding, or they like to be marching, but they don't particularly want to be standing around being bombarded. Yeah. Nobody likes that. So they're all starting to freak out. Commander can see it's a problem. So, unbelievably, he gets out in the open, And he sits down in a chair and he calls over the company barber and he says, "Give me a haircut." In the open with the artillery. Now, the artillery's at a distance, so I don't want to exaggerate too far, but this is true. And the soldiers are all staring at him like, first they think, this guy's insane. Secondly, they think, well, if he thinks he can take a haircut out here, it can't be that bad, right? And they all started to relax and play cards and so forth and so on. And he said it was the worst haircut of his life, jerking into the blade. But I mean, you wouldn't believe the things that really happen. We don't have to go far. And I tell the writers, please, whenever possible, try to find real ones. Because, of course, one last thing. I'm sorry. Obviously, I get excited about this, but we're in 1945 in the game right now. So I've been with the characters for a long time. And at this point, I really do feel this deep empathy with the real soldiers. I see the pictures of them out in the snow, and the writer's been making me feel the out in the snow. And I just feel, God, it must have just sucked. I feel the empathy. And then when I get a decision, and then I see what they did, I really feel I connect. Like I have a little sense of that. I'll give you a last example of that. This really surprised me. One of the writers put up, we had an archivist go out and go collect the real records of the real cotton balers, reports of the junior officers. And so he puts up the most boring thing ever. He puts up a piece of paper with a logistics report, like how many, how much bullets have come in, how much supplies we need, so forth. And I found myself staring at it with interest because I was thinking, oh my God, are we going to have enough supplies for this next battle? I mean, I could not believe I was interested in the most bureaucratic administrative thing. So really interesting. And so the empathy for those who lived, right? Not just empathy for these fictional characters.
Mm-hmm. As a quick time check, we are just about at an hour and 20 into our little chat there, Luke. And again, I can feel that this could easily be like a 2.5, 3 hour long cast if we're not careful. But I figure in terms of our schedule for like the remaining of our time, I figure we'll move on the next few minutes. I want to talk a little bit more about the research you've done when it comes to trying to make this game realistic, and as you said, the historical accuracy and the respect. And then we'll talk a little bit more about telling the story, again, storytelling in games. And then we'll probably wrap things up with like a few like general questions about Burn Command, release date, platform, stuff like that. What was I about to say?
So you had research. You want me to start with that?
I actually have a few other questions before I forget. One thing I wanted to clarify is you just said, Luke, regarding having like archival footage and real situations in the game. So for a lot of the real events that you're trying to mirror in Burden of Command or represent, are you going to have, like, will there always be that, like, historical information button? Like, if I want to learn more about what actually happened or the actual historical case, will that be there?
We give you the sort of tantalating stuff. In other words, we give you what you want if you're interested, but we're not going to belabor it. So who would think footnotes are interesting? So we hide the footnotes, but they're there, meaning that when you're in an interesting situation, you're personally interested in it, you might see a little book icon in a corner, which you can happily ignore. I want to be clear about that. But if you're curious, right? Like if I read you The Lethal Insubordination again, and you saw a little bookmark, think, oh my God, somebody really had to think about shooting their sergeant? I wonder what they did. You can put your mouse over, and it pops up with something the writers have written, and they say, well, Lieutenant Spears, and, Easy Company, actually made a decision, he shot the guy, and, if you want to learn more, go look at this reference. We'll give you a book reference or whatever is appropriate, right? So we do reference it, and we reference McManus' book. He wrote a whole book on the history of the cotton balers through World War II and actually in all the other wars. So we reference that, but again, it's not in your face. You experience it. If you want more, we point to it. But there are not, we don't have the capacity for a big, civilopedia of all the history. It'd be fun. I'll tell you a fantasy I have when we sent an archivist into the National Archives to get all the not all, but most of the cotton balers' records for the battles we're in and so forth, as well as a lot of pictures, many of them never seen before. If you go to the front page of our website, scroll all the way to the bottom, it's a pretty emotionally compelling picture. Small child in Germany, late war, probably not been seen outside of historians before. We had color eyes. So we went in there and we got a lot of the materials. I think I lost my track there, but we got into the real materials. Right. So that's how you can do more. The fantasy I had was there's a thing that's called, I remember now, Yankee or Yank. I forget. It's basically it was a GI Army periodical the soldiers would read. What I'd love to do is scan them in, and so if you want, you can go read the articles at the time the guys were reading. I don't know if we'll get to it. That's the kind of thing I'd love to do. But that's the answer is we point you in the right direction. You're in the real history, and we have a lot of imagery and so forth that is from the real. We'll sometimes put up real documents the real soldiers were dealing with.
Again, it's very fascinating, and as you said, Luke, when it comes to this kind of information, it's not going to obviously be for everybody. You're going to have people who they're not going to
I'm
click
listening.
on
I'm
that
turning
link.
on a light.
Sure.
I don't want to be, the weird Phantom of the Opera here.
Well,
yes,
we had
experience horrible things in war. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, we actually had a podcast with a developer. He did a Brigador, Hugh Monahan. The light went from like sunny to dark, or the entire length of the cast, so people could actually see the time take place over our chat.
Darkest dungeon, a burden of command.
There we go.
Well, the darkest dungeon in some sense is war, of course.
But yeah, it's always interesting about having that historical information. As you just said, the civilization does that in spades with the Civopedia, or the Civpedia. And it always fascinates me about having that kind of outside inspiration or that outside knowledge that you can educate someone on when it comes to how it applies to a video game or how it kind of inspired that game. Going back to, of course, what I said about Assassin's Creed Origins earlier, or Assassin's Creed Origins. There you go.
Well, two forms of research for that. One is, we needed a real regiment. I mean, a group of companies about 100 men. So just so people aren't, we're a little grounded these days, so we tend to forget. So we needed a real, regiment company we could follow, and so one of them, the Big Red One is a famous one. You see that in movies and so forth. That's in the Bloody First that's coming out. But we followed the Cotton Balers and McManus. I approached McManus, said, really love to follow your book and so forth. Would you be willing to support us? McManus is a historian again. And he said, he's been wonderful. He said, yeah, he'd help advise, and he's reading every single scene and giving us playtesting on it. He'll probably do some of the tactical. I won't make him do most of it, but he's every scene, everything he's given us feedback on, like the vets. So, one form of research was going in there. We did McManus. We sent the archivists in. We read a lot of that stuff. We did secondary sources. We have some really high-quality guys who know a lot about World War II who've drawn their own backgrounds, like Steve Overton, who's got a big background in combat mission, which is very hardcore, seriously modeled. And he's also doing his own board game. But the guy knows so much, and he was a sergeant in the U.S. Army. So, we draw on their experiences, which are immense. And we have people outside of the U.S. too. We have a Dutch soldier who's Hank, who's a big help to us. So a lot of experts. Go look at I'm going to forget people, and then I'll be embarrassed, and I don't want to just go on. So go to the Burden of Command team side, and you'll see the people we draw on. So there's deep, deep depth here on the narrative side, the tactical, the history side to draw on. It makes it not easy, but pretty nice. So, and then the art form research I just want to mention is my background is psychology and physiology, which means physiology, psychology, which means, what's our human nature for psychology? What draws us? Like I mentioned, embarrassment being a motivator to go die. So human emotions are very complex, and we're starting to, nobody understands them, but at least we're starting to point at them, like Darkest Dungeon and Papers, Please and This War of Mine, and I haven't played Edith Finch and so forth, but things like that. So my background, I have a lot to draw on in terms of, first, what makes for psychologically, I hope, somewhat more plausible, I don't know if I'll say realistic, plausible behavior. And then secondly, just a little bit what might, I hope, make for an interesting game. I'll use one example for fun in the biology behavior of seagulls. Do you want me to give you my seagull example?
Oh, sure.
You didn't expect that, did you? So the seagull example is, when I was younger, I remember seeing a seagull. I was sitting there, I was eating something. Seagull was interested in what I was eating. So, I was always sort of watching behavior, especially animal behavior, because they don't have language to confuse you what their emotional behavior is. So, at least the less subtle animals. Some of them are subtle. So, it was very interesting. I threw some food out for it. And it did this dance. And the dance was, we get closer. So obviously it's motivation of hunger, greed. I want to eat the food. But then to look at me like, oh, crap. And to back off. And you could sort of see the distance where it's two emotions that were driving to do different things were balanced, right? So it was balanced between a threat, hey, you could eat me, and an opportunity. I can get that bread, right? Now, what does that sound like? Does that remind us of the game design principle of interesting decision? What is
Mm-hmm.
it, Sid Meier's interesting decision? Well, I submit that interesting decisions where you typically balance between tough choices and ideally, not only based on different motivations, seagulls in this case, but, we'll put you like the good of your men versus your moral responsibility in the battlefield versus what's tactically going to be successful versus your responsibility to the officers above you for the campaign, right? We'll put you in that, but ideally it will be a threat and an opportunity. I think if you look at games, often the most painful decisions are a part of you saying run away, and the other part saying go get it, and Seagull feels that, and we feel that, and a good game will put you in a sense of bird in command. Should I grandstand here? Grandstand's an action where we hope you'll stand up in the battlefield, like stand up in front of that sniper. Tremendous morale effect if you survive, right? So, should I stand up, right? Threat versus opportunity. So when I say research, I have I'm not saying I know the answers, but I have a pretty deep background in terms of a lot of study on the psychology of behavior and, the complexity of it. So at least I can see the problems and maybe have a little different angle what make for interesting decisions. You all have to tell me if they're any good.
Great. All right. I think with that, here's one game series. I'm not sure if you've done any research, if you had a chance to look at it, but have you ever played any of the Fire Emblem games, Luke, on the handheld?
People have always told me that.
Yeah.
I haven't. I didn't have much of a console childhood. So I have played, the sort of, I understand that the Panzer General was somewhat like that it drew on that kind of thing. But no, I haven't played that. So, which one should I play?
Oh, jeez. I've been trying to get involved with the Fire Emblem series. I find them interesting, but that's a good 30, 40-minute chat. I know the latest ones have gotten really popular. The one, I think Fire Emblem Awakenings, I think that's what it was called. The one that came out, I want to say either 2016, maybe 2015. That was like kind of split into like 3 different games. Was the one that kind of broke into the mainstream for a lot of gamers, I should say.
Is that the one where if they're close to each other, they reinforce each other and make them more effective?
Yeah.
Yeah, see, now that's really very close to the leadership idea. I do know about that. I read some articles on that, right? Which is if the leader's close, everybody wins potentially, right? So where your leader is very important to what's gonna work out in the battlefield.
Mm-hmm. Let me double check. Yeah, it was Fire Emblem. Wait, was this it? No, not Fire Emblem Awakenings. Oh, wait, here. There's so many Fire Emblem games. That's always the trouble part. Here is Fire Emblem Fates. I believe that's the one that came out in 2015. That was the one that started. That was the last one that came out before the mobile game, and that's one that a lot of people have felt like kind of brought new fans into the series.
I know that Paul Wang, our writer, is a big fan of that, so he's drawn on it some, I believe. I'll take other suggestions. I am, very interested to learn. That's why I listen to your show.
Awesome. All right, let me get back here to the chat, because before I start just staring down the Fire Emblem wiki page to see anything else I can learn, let's get back to things. We've already talked a little bit about the historical research. I think I have a few more general questions for you about that.
Yeah.
Then we'll move, and that will kind of segue into storytelling, and then we'll wrap things up probably shortly after that. But I just want to stop and say, look, it's been great talking to you this evening. This is a fantastic conversation. If you're free in the future, we can certainly have you back on, and who knows what else we can talk about then.
Well, I'd love to. It's just a wonderful opportunity to have live, to have the questions and so forth. I mean, honestly, it's one of the big pleasures for me personally.
Nice.
Outside of I'm very interested in this topic, obviously.
Yeah.
Leadership and so forth is, I tend to run the Twitter account for better or worse. So I love talking to people and hearing, people's thoughts and the things I've learned, the things I've been pointed to, right, in terms of games. And so, like, oh my gosh, I've met, there's a woman out there who studied World War I poetry. She's pointed to me all kinds of interesting things. I've met all kinds of military people and gamers of all types. And I had two great design conversations with people on Facebook and Twitter about and by the way, go to Twitter and tell me some more. What do you think of the best interfaces, right? So I think XCOM is a pretty good interface, right? What do you think of the best interfaces? Because I'll say one more thing in the biology of behavior. We're animals, right? We count every calorie. And I mean, we count every calorie. So that became clear to me. I'm just trying to give you an example of how I think weirdly about game design. I remember sitting there back when people used dictionaries. There was a time. And I was sitting down, my dictionary was up there, and I needed to check spelling word, and I actually thought about, do I want to stand up and get the dictionary? And I caught myself doing it. I thought, oh my gosh, I'm thinking about the 1 calorie to stand up and get the book out to look at it. Please. You know, in remote control. But we do, right? We count every calorie. And so in the interface, you know, I think about things like, I'm not saying I succeed, but I promise you I think about things like, does the user have to move his eyes to the bottom of the screen? Because the user notices if he has to move his eyes to the bottom of the screen, right? And when does he? What should I put HUD, heads-up display, like in Air Force Jet? What should I put right at the unit they're looking at? What should I move out of the way? I mean, it's critical for our biology.
Oh yeah, I mean, hell, UI cast, that's a good hour and a half we could have, especially about strategy design.
So what I was trying to say, I got a little off track there, but the point is I had a great conversation with the audience. They gave me some great pointers, you know, what they thought were good designs, various things like, you know, Age of Wonders and the Legends, the 4X Legends game. I'm getting a little tired, so I'm blanking on that one. But, you know, good interface. Oh, God, they have a beautiful UI. The Endless Legends.
Yeah.
Aesthetically, I pay attention to them. So, but I had, you know, people, and not the audience, but in social media, point things to me. And it was useful. I can show you the deck. I went off and studied them later and drew things from them. So I listened pretty hard.
Nice. Have you had any look at the new game from the original XCOM creator, Phoenix Point, yet?
Oh, of course I'm a Kickstarter. I'm backer, of course. And hey, have you played his Chaos Reborn, which is an interesting object lesson on whether people want chaos or not. Very interesting. It's tricky. Something we have to worry about in our game because, you know, the units may not follow your orders all the time. But I'm a big admirer of hers. I played the original XCOM as well as his Chaos, as well as I'll play the new Phoenix.
Oh yes, so. I'm definitely excited about that one. That's on my list of games to jump at when it gets released.
Have you had him on? You got to get him on.
I keep sending him emails. He's not getting back to me.
The guy might be a little distracted.
If you can send him something my way, I would really appreciate it.
What I say. He did say something pleasant back to me, but that's as far as I got, I think.
Oscar in chat said, for a future cast, he wants a story anecdotes cast sprinkled with sequel psychology. That's what he wants the next
with what?
Sequel psychology. He wants story anecdotes with sequel psychology. He wants more of those for a future.
Oh, seagull.
Yeah.
I thought you were saying sequel. Like sequel. Oh my God, I don't know what to say to that question. I can give you more sequels. Like, I can give you primate psychology. I can give you all kinds of interesting stuff. I mean, there's a reason they say things like the naked ape, because apes are naked. They do a lot of weird politics and so forth, but you learn a lot because they will sabotage and power grab, and it's amazing. So you learn a lot about human psychology and national psychology. But I'd have fun with that one.
Oh, good. Yeah, maybe that should be our next.
Boy, my God, that would be a fun one with the audience for pet stories.
Oh yeah.
I'm not being facetious. I mean, pets are pretty interesting, right? We learn a lot from them in terms of how they behave, and we're not as far from them as we'd like to think.
Yeah, well, we're not careful.
How many scraps do I steal from my son's candy jar?
I think we found what our next cast will be then, whenever you have time, Luke. But with that said, before we get too off track, I do want to talk a little bit more about the historical research you've done, and again, about that challenge of telling a serious story with video games. And that will probably be our final group of topics then for our cast for tonight. So, to start with, you've mentioned a few books already throughout the cast, but just to clarify for this section, in terms of some of the research that you've done in terms of getting historical context to these battles and to these people, what are, I guess, if someone wants to look some of these up, what are some like the bigger or, I guess, more recognizable research or books that you've read or looked at?
Okay, so, wow, I get to answer a research question. All right. So, first, if you want to get the cheat sheet for the game, though maybe I encourage you kind of to wait until you've experienced the Cotton Bailers yourself. It would be American Courage, American Carnage by John McManus, and we draw very heavily from it. that doesn't mean that you're going to make the same decisions, because it's not clear what the right decisions were in some of those cases. We draw very heavily from it, as well as other sources, as well as the writer's imagination sometimes. But they draw from things that happen in other theaters and campaigns. Typically, we don't let them get away with crap in terms of things that we don't believe are credible one way or another. So that I really recommend Brains and Bullets, which is this remarkable tactical psychology. It goes through ancient battles and Napoleonic World War II, not at the level of, and then the unit moved here and then he said let's flank them. I mean, that's interesting, but it was really like, well, what do men do when they're under fire? For instance, I'll give you a weird anecdote. I didn't know this one until I read the book. So when there's like this moment of no return when in Napoleonic or World War II you're charging the enemy, and I forget what it is exactly. It's 50 yards or 100 yards. But when you get to that, it's sort of the last moment when soldiers feel they have a decision to make about whether they're going to do this or not. And once they cross that line, they probably will go all the way in hand-to-hand fight. But this may be a point when they turn back. So you have this sort of like breakwater of decision-making for them. So that on the tactical psychology. There's also Marines, still, as I understand it from the Marines and the team, read a book called, let's see, I'd have to check. It's the Von Schell one, Battle Leadership or Battlefield Leadership. I wish I had it right in front of me. There's another one, fascinating. Here's one. Good. This one, Infantry in Battle. This is a pretty. The marketing guys are going to kill me putting a book up later. I mean, what the hell are you doing, Luke? What were you thinking? So, Infantry in Battle, and this is about World War I, but it's pretty much on the leadership issue. What did they learn from World War I leading men? And what's fascinating is that the head of our all armed forces in World War II, not Eisenhower, but damn it, I'm forgetting his name right now. I'm embarrassed. He was Eisenhower's boss, but he was a colonel at the time, and he led the effort. He'll come to me in a moment. But that's a really fascinating one. And then, oh my God, I would have been so embarrassed if I hadn't done this. There's some great novels in this. So forget the history side. Matterhorn is a great novel, as well as What It Is Like to Go to War by Marlantes. I like to quote this. This guy is amazing. He's a Vietnam vet who was a Rhodes Scholar. He left his Rhodes Scholarship in Oxford. Could easily set out the war. And he volunteered to go serve in Vietnam. It's kind of his family background and so forth. I mean, gosh, you gotta admire that. And he went off and he became a lieutenant, and he wrote about his experiences very eloquently. And like you said, I think earlier in the podcast, he talks about the good and the bad of war, and he says I had the writers read this book, and I've read it, of course. And he says when you go to war, like it or not, you enter the Temple of Mars. And what the hell does that mean? It's a very fancy way of saying something important, which is, like it or not, you're entering a spiritual plane because you're in the presence of death. Mm-hmm. And you may not be prepared. So when our modern soldiers go to war, nobody may have trained them for death of their friend, death of child, death of the enemy. They're going to have to deal with it. They've been trained to kill. They may or may not have gotten training. Marlantes wrote some op-ed saying we need more training for this. But his point is, when you enter the temple, this is not a temple of happiness. Mm-hmm. This is arguably the temple of hell. But it is a spiritual place because you're having to cope with death, right? You're back on the burden of command. What are you going to do about people's lives? Your own, your officers, the civilians, the enemies, you're responsible, right? So it's a tough place to be. There are some good things, right? That's why it's a band of brothers. It's brotherhood, that sense of commitment to each other, right? I had a friend who was a West Point Rhodes Scholar. He was an amazing guy. Oh my gosh, he was a ranger. And he told me that the point he felt most connected to people, I haven't told this story actually, I'm talking Burden of Command, so it's a new one. He told me the closest he felt to people was they'd been on a 3-day hike, and they're so worn down, they've been starving and so forth, that the only thing they think about was getting back, right, and staying upright. And he said, I felt this deep, deep spiritual connection to the other soldiers because I knew exactly what was in their head. Mm-hmm. It was exactly what was in my head. So, one of the highest spiritual moments. On the other hand, I don't think we have to search for how horrible it is, too, right? That's obvious. But I just want to point out this is a very complex place. So The just to give away a little bit, the writer's guidance for the first act is the Temple of Mars, right? You are going to go in there and you're going to have that experience where you're going to decide what mindset you're going to deal, how you're going to cope with death. So that's another book I'd recommend. The novels, and there are many good novels. I hope your listeners will come suggest more novels. I'm always trying to read, but novels are very good in conveying the emotional experience as well as personal biographies.
Right, and again, there's just so much we can easily segue into when it comes to this topic, and again about what it means to build a game that tries to convey this with that sense of respect, because I think that's a major part when we're talking about things from a historical context. It's different when we're playing a game like XCOM or Darkest Dungeon, when we don't have a real life example of Darkest Dungeon or XCOM. But when it comes to trying to convey something realistic, and this, I think this is a good segue into talking about serious storytelling, the challenge from the designer's point of view is how do you represent something like this and have it stand on its own in that sense? Because as we said, it's very easy to show something and make it seem like you're trying to force a message onto someone. You're trying to make a statement when you're just trying to display things from that position of this is what happened, or this is something of what happened, good and bad.
That's a very powerful question. It's very hard. Very hard.
I know.
And it's personal. So my last dev blog I wrote about personal. My father was in World War II, right? And many of the teen grandfathers or parents are now more great grandfathers, but they have a family connection. I mean, we're talking about people's lives, not XCOM animated 3D guys. So it's very tricky. So for instance, one of the problems we ran into morally for us as a team was, McManus describes a decision by one of the superiors that seems pretty clearly bad. And I don't want, for the reason I'm about to explain, I'm not going to call that decision out in detail here because I don't want to point to somebody who served for real and say, oh, look at the bad decision. Because who the hell am I to judge? I wasn't there. Yeah. I mean, who among you, who among us, who me, mote in our own eyes? Who among us has made the right decision all the time? I mean, we've all made decisions that have cost people and ourselves. So guess what? In war too. So we had this guy who's a real person who made pretty, on the surface, pretty questionable decision. Probably, arguably, people would die. And McManus's job is to tell it as it happened. That's the story. But we're doing a game. First, so we have to be careful because we're doing a game. Secondly, it's an interactive game. So you can make choices. We're not doing a novel or a movie. So things can be done differently. Now, I'm very, very reluctant to put words in the mouth of historical figures. It's not my right. So the guidance to the writers is, generally speaking, we try to stick very carefully to what they did do. And if it's bad, arguably, or on the surface, we're going to be very careful about bringing that one out because we don't have the whole context. We don't know why I made that decision. I mean, it's so easy, so damn easy to judge at a distance. Yeah. So we try not to. So our goal is, you said the word. The word is respect. Right? We try to have respect for these lives. So one of the things we do is we fictionalize the company. So you're not playing real people. We don't have the right to do that. You're playing a fictional company, but they do go through real situations. And I'll be honest, part of it's for a good game, which is we cherry pick. Right? You get to go run around and have more interesting battles rather than one company had some interesting, some boring. So because it is a game, we want it to be engaging. But we try to be respectful of it, and then we have the vets and McManus and the writers to try and keep us honest, and that's the other watchword. And I've asked the vets about this. Game. How comfortable do you feel supporting this game, trying to be more serious on war, where people die, and it's a game? And what they say is, which is encouraging, is they say, what we appreciate is that you're pointing to the realities. You can't possibly deliver the realities, which I'm grateful because I don't think any of us particularly really want to experience the realities. I mean, go read about Pacific War if you want to be depressed. But they say you point to the realities, and we want that because too few games do, and they consistently point back to that burden of command point. The responsibility for lives is so central to the experience. So what we hope is our respect is we can point. Right? We're sure as hell not saying we know the answers, but we are trying to point, and we're trying to put you in those situations like this War of Mine did, where you can think about who you are. What is my journey going to be? Who will I be? And I've found personally, I'll stop, is you discover maybe you're a little different person than you thought you were when you have to confront certain decisions. It's
Mm-hmm.
all very easy at a distance and not really so easy when you're up close. And you might think about shooting those prisoners so your men don't die. Because, these prisoners may you send the prisoners back, you may be at risk, and maybe Dearborn, who you've been, working with forever, maybe he'll pay the price because you were nice to the prisoners.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we're all against shooting prisoners, but you start to understand the motivation.
Yeah. And I think that's a really fascinating point there, Luke, about, again, what it means to make these decisions. That it's not just, +5 morality points or,
Yeah,
plus -5 dark side points in the game. Like, these choices have to have. I made a post about this, I know, a few years ago at this point, about, again, the importance of both the short term and the long term consequence. And as we've said, one of the issues that a lot of video games tend to do is they focus on the short term, but then the long term just seems to, it doesn't matter. Like going back to BioWare, if I do something bad and then 10 minutes later I do something good, but that bad action I just did, it doesn't exist. It's like I didn't even do anything.
we try
But
pretty hard not to let you get away with that, both
yeah,
by the system of mindsets, and the writers spend a lot of time trying. You can only do so much.
yeah.
Trying to connect back to relevant events and so forth, which is also powerful. They'll reference things that happened, the characters back in North Africa when you're up in France, and it's powerful.
Mm-hmm.
You won't be reminded.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, it's just very interesting about putting the player, and this goes back to the article that I wrote about. It's not about you telling the player, this is bad or this person did a good
Right.
thing. It's about you saying to the player, okay, you're doing this. What do you do? How do you respond to this? And just giving it to them, black and white. You're not trying to.
Yeah, how do you respond? Thank you.
Yes.
That's what we're trying to do. How do you respond? We're trying not to make it there's the right answer. We're trying to say,
Mm-hmm.
how are you going to respond? You could stay back because you're more responsible to command the men, so you're more effective. You get more command points.
Mm-hmm.
You could be forward, so you build trust, so you can lead better. But then you won't command as well. What was the right answer? I don't know what the right answer was there,
No.
right? But both were coherent. The different mindsets, the writers work hard to make the different mindset choices coherent. It might be sensible to be cautious because you'll survive longer, therefore maybe you'll become a better leader.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, you could call that cowardice, being cautious, right? You should be out there charging ahead like spears. Of course, then you might not be there anymore to take care of your men. Tough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, here's another game inspiration that it just popped in my head as we're talking about these choices. I think most of my audience may not play this one. Did you ever hear the game Tactics Ogre for the PlayStation Portable?
I guess I've heard of it. I haven't played it.
Oop.
Sorry, hold on. Clearly, I've said the wrong thing. They're coming for me. So
There we go. The reason I brought that up was it was one of the few games I have played that tried to show that moral gray area when it came to war. And now, of course, it was
yeah.
a JRPG or a tactical RPG, so we're not getting into real life conflicts, but it had to do with you leading a resistance against, the Empire doing their own things. And there's one part that stuck with me after I did. It had you decide, do you follow the orders of the Empire and kill civilians or kill the resistance group that will end the war sooner? Or do you side with them, which may be considered somewhat of a moral right, but you're prolonging the war, and in essence, you're going to cause more people to die. It's another game that did something like that was The Witcher, the first Witcher game.
I have still not played that. Everybody beats me up. I've got to play that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have the hours, but I should
I
at least
know.
watch some Let's Plays. And Valkyrie Chronicles, I think, is another one where
Oh
they
yes.
do an interesting mix.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Papers, Please. And one that popped in my head, I may have just. Tyranny. I haven't played Tyranny. Paul played that. The sort of the Baldur's Gate-esque, but you're playing for the bad guys.
Oh yes.
So,
And
yeah.
that's actually a really interesting point I just want to bring up, Luke, about making games about the bad guy. Because one of the things
Yeah.
I always find interesting, and I've said this before for people who watch me long term, is that whenever there are games that have good and bad, like, an actual good campaign or a bad campaign, I always look at the bad campaign first because I want to see what the developers write from that side. And one of the more interesting aspects that we see from most games that a lot of developers have trouble writing the bad campaign or making the player be bad. And again, it goes back to what we were saying earlier regarding black and white choices, that when it comes to what really happens, it's never really about, the mustache twirling evil villain or, the halo above the person's head good guy. And it's very hard, I think, to convey pushing someone to be bad in a video game. Because again, it gets back to what we were saying earlier, that if you let the player make bad choices or be the bad guy, are you glorifying them? Like, how do you present those kinds of choices to someone and still remain neutral?
It will be very challenging when we try to do a German campaign, right?
I was about to bring that up, too.
Very challenging. We'll get a lot of feedback, and some people will be very against what we're doing, and I hope some people will be open to it, but we'll try to do an honest job. It's very challenging, right? But I would say this. What's interesting is, name me a historical bad person who didn't think they were the good guy. I'm sure, Caligula, okay. Right, but a lot of these people who did terrible things felt they were serving right. In fact, often those serving right with the most enthusiasm do some of the worst things because they're so sure they're right. Mm-hmm. So most quote-unquote bad guys, bad people don't think they're bad. They think they're doing the good. So it's very complicated. Yeah. They can give you the story, too, why they're doing the good, why they're clearly doing the right thing.
Mm-hmm. And again, as we all know, history is written by the winners. And
yes.
It's just very tricky. Again, and I was about to bring up about doing a German campaign during World War II, because that is one thing that a lot of developers have definitely shied away from over the years for very obvious reasons.
Very obvious, especially if we're going to do this at Burn Command. But for instance, in that spirit, I had a lot of respect for the Ken Burns Vietnam series that came out recently, because they interviewed both Americans and the North Vietnamese and the South Vietnamese. Mm-hmm. And I think it makes it kind of very, very interesting hearing all the different perspectives. At this point, you hear one of my favorite war poets is Wilfred Owen. He has a line I can't reproduce quite correctly. He says, my subject is not war, but the pity of war. And when you watch the Vietnam War, you just feel the pity. I mean, it's just a tragic story for everybody involved. Maybe some people want some of the things they wanted, but just listen to their stories. It's so sad.
Mm-hmm. We have a question from Chad. I think this is more of a random tangent, but do you have any thoughts on microtransactions, Luke, in games?
I've shied away from any games with microtransactions. My gut reaction is I don't like them, but I think I should be accused of ignorance. So I've not tried them, and maybe there's a place for them. There will be no microtransactions in Burden of Command. But if you want to write me later and tell me why there should be, I'll listen, because I haven't thought hard about it. I just have a knee-jerk reaction.
Oscar in chat, he mentioned, of course, Command and Conquer. That, of course, had you playing as the Brotherhood of Nod. And that was, I think that was my first experience. I'm sure for a lot of people, like their first experience of having the quote-unquote bad guy campaign. And as you said earlier, Luke, that's one of the more fascinating parts, that most people who are on the bad side or who do evil things, they think they're doing it right. I forget if this is a quote or something from Joseph Campbell, but, the bad guy is usually the hero of his own story or their own story.
Oh, that's a great quote. I'm stealing that from you. I just thought of that. No, seriously, Joseph Campbell, he, of course, as probably most of us know, he was a lot of the inspiration for Star Wars, right, and so forth, that journey. Right, but so yeah, the bad guy thinks he's the hero of his story. Well, we all tend to think we're the hero of our story, right?
Let me see. Again, like my brain, we're like almost 2 hours in. I'm sure you're probably feeling on your side just as I am.
Yeah, I'm gonna fumble a few more soon.
Yeah, so we'll probably go for like a few more minutes, but we'll begin to wrap things up. So I'm going to say right now, then, for you folks watching this live, this will be our official last call for any questions for Luke. We'll probably, for what I have left, we'll probably go for maybe another 10-15 minutes, and then we'll start to wind things down for our chat. But keeping with the topic of, again, telling stories from a serious perspective or just trying to represent this, one of the more interesting things or actually this goes back to my article, I'm going to get your thoughts on this, Luke, about what it means to show an atrocity, show something that is downright evil. For instance, some recent examples: Call of Duty's infamous No Russian scene. I don't know if you played Spec Ops: The Line, but they did a whole scene or a situation with white phosphorus and what it did to a group of people. Like, when you're trying to show that stuff, we can see people go two minds about it. There are some saying that you show it to show, the sheer impact of it on what's happening.
Yeah.
But then there are people who feel that because it's a video game, because this is supposed to be entertainment, you're kind of either glorifying or you're just trying to get a rise out of the audience. So,
yeah.
I guess, what are your thoughts on that?
You're special. You're not that nice. You're asking me the tough questions when I'm most tired.
I'm tired too, so I think we're both kind of playing a handicap.
Yeah, this is a journalistic technique. I know that. Wait till they're worn down, then zap. Seriously, very tough. So the question that is respect. We keep going back to respect. I look at the Band of Brothers. That's why I showed the artists. I showed the writers early on. And my take there was, what I say to the writers is avoid violence porn. Meaning, let's not do gratuitous violence because it's dramatic and exciting. There is a place for it, right? But we're not going to do it because, wow, it grabs the attention. So I thought Band of Brothers did a good job. Generally there's not a lot of violence porn in it. There are some pretty brutal scenes in it. Yeah. I'm thinking about in the forest, the blonde-haired captain has artillery fire. Pretty brutal. But it's not pervasive. So what we did was I kept encouraging him not to do the easy violence porn. But in fact, just last week we had a conversation about it. We're going to go back and do our revising and editing. And I said, now, you need to go back and you need to insert something. You've sort of been respectful, but we need to make sure we're conveying this as war, right? This is not just interesting moral situations, and then I go back and have lunch. Like, people die and they die horribly. If you want to have the brutal, go read With the Old Breed. I had to put that book down repeatedly. It's about the Marines in the Pacific Islands. Oh my God. I mean, every war is awful. Oh my God, it's awful. That's one reason I think the Pacific HBO series did a little less well, because it's brutal. So we do want to get some of that across. But Marlentes is very important, the guy who did the What It's Like to Go to War. It's just not as simple as it's brutal. It is brutal. But it's also, it's a connection. But then another thing he points out is, it's power. Sometimes he said, he does not deny he felt gloriously powerful. He was up in a plane. They were firing the very super heavy weapons, I forget what they are, that fire so many shots at once, trashing the Vietnamese. He said, there's a pleasure in it, right? Because I wanted them dead. So there's some ugly feelings there, as well as some very positive. We all know the heroic stories, which do happen. There are good things that happen in war. People take care of each other. They rise above themselves. They don't leave the others behind. They don't leave their dead bodies behind, like the Marines. I mean, people do incredible things in war, but good and bad. So all I can say is, we try to balance. One of the other things we've said is, we're going to try to be honest. So we cannot tell this story and not tell the good with the bad. So I hesitate to bring this up, but I guess I will. So, they go, this group, the cotton balers, to go to the concentration camp. So we're going to go to the concentration camp. So, and because we can't try to do this authentic one and not go there. But it's not much fun. Luckily, we just found out last week McManus wrote a whole book on a soldier's experience in going to the camp. So we're in pretty good shape for at least being told the right stuff. I'm not saying we'll do it right, but and I know, Call of Duty. I'm glad they tried to do it too. So I think it comes down to, are you consistent in trying to paint the good and the bad and be consistent in your approach the whole way through? If one moment you're making it kill zombies and have a cool, fun ride, and next moment, oh my God, people died horribly. I think that's tricky. But what we try to do is consistency of approach. So with the key word of respect. Will we succeed? I'm sure we'll fail a lot, but we're trying, and we're getting the feedback, and we listen. We want it engaging. Remember, we're not trying to write a history book. There are many history books. We're trying to make this engaging. So that's my first focus. This has got to be a game first. Means got to be engaging. But after that, we do try to be respectful of the topics, and we have vets on, including combat vets, so they they're not going to let us get away with crap.
Yeah.
I hope.
Yeah, and again, I think you answer that brilliantly there, Luke. It's about presenting things fairly. It's about showing the good and the
That's well said.
bad.
Yeah.
And I think that is one of the key points about this when it comes to serious storytelling. As you said, it's very easy to devolve into quote unquote violence porn. And
Yeah.
there's a very big difference between, showing someone getting shot and then showing someone get shot and, it's
Yes.
completely over the
What's the
top.
goal?
Yeah. Like,
What's the motivation?
hmm Like I was thinking about as you were describing it, I was reminded of the Normandy scene in Saving Private Ryan, and just
In the which scene?
the Normandy landing in Saving
Oh,
Private
yes,
Ryan,
yes.
and just what they try to display there. And again, there's just so many ways you could have made that more violent or make that depiction even more so. And like going back to your background in psychology, I mean, I'm sure you know as many ways to try and, I guess, quote unquote, pull those levers, like those emotional levers for the audience to try and get a rise out of them. And
Yeah, we do. We're conscious trying to do some of that, but we're trying to do it with, we hope, the right intent.
yes,
But people disagree. So, for example, in one of the opening scenarios, at least in the one we have right now, we may change it for a bit. We kind of shouldn't give away too many things. So we're going to convince you this is not your everyday game. So at one point to do that, in terms of its intent about war, I put a brutal painting. It's not a brutal picture. Brutal painting of a Marine who was horribly injured in Pacific died. In fact, I talked about it on Twitter recently. I didn't put it up there because I couldn't find a way to say, dangerous content directly. But I pointed to it. I forget the name right now at the second. You can ping me on Twitter and I'll try and dig it up again. It's brutal. Just imagining that it was true. But it's a painting, right? So it's got a little distance. But there was immediate disagreement. The majority of people, especially the vets, felt we should do it because they felt it was important to point to it. But I did have some feedback saying, this is too gratuitous. We don't need that to make the points. So who's right? I don't know who's right. In the end, I have to make some decisions. But we'll try to do it with good intent, and we'll try to balance. And I promise you, we will not please everyone.
And again, that's always the ultimate rub when it comes to these discussions and these topics. It's never going to be an easy answer, and you're always going to piss somebody off. Like it's just going to happen. Like the swallows. What's that famous saying? The swallows heading to Capistrano for the winter time. You will always piss someone off when it comes to polarizing topic, no matter how you handle it.
Well, I hope I wrote in the dev blog is respect again. I want to have respect for the historical people, but I also want to have respect for the gamers. Right? They're buying a game. They're not buying a book.
Yeah.
So it's got to be engaging, for example. Secondly, we've got to give them freedom to make decisions, so forth. Secondly, I'm not going to put them forth 400 hours of boredom to give them a realistic experience. You probably should go serve in the military and get that experience if that's what you really want. So, instantly, I'm distorting. I'm making it much more dramatic than it is day to day, like Band of Brothers did, right? Or Saving Private Ryan. Pick your choices, right? So, but we try to keep thinking, are we approaching you as a player as well as the historical people involved, with respect, right? So that's what we go back to as a touchstone to try to see if we're doing it. The good news is, we don't have to invent a lot to be. You brought up your realistic question earlier. I mean, history is so strange that it's easy to find drama, that's real, and bring it out, and then you can see what you do.
And I know we are now way past 2 hours into our cast, and again, I could sit here and talk to you all night long, but I think we're both starting to feel it here. And I would love to talk more to you about more of the serious side when it comes to storytelling. And maybe we can do that in the near future of your game, Luke.
That'll be fun. One thing I'll say at the end, we've been so serious here. I won't use the word fun, but I am trying to make the tactical play engaging. So unless somebody's thinking, oh my God, I only go do this if I want to be depressed, I mean, did you appreciate watching the Band of Brothers, right? It was engaging. I wanted to watch it, and some parts were bad, but it was engaging. So I'm hoping it's engaging, and the tactical play is interesting, right? In the same way XCOM is interesting because, like the Seagull, we can make it hard for you tactically too, and make it interesting. Remain Remains to be seen if I'll succeed in that side. But I want it to be an interesting tactical decision, because a good leader, you got to make good tactical decisions, not just feel. Thank you, sir, for feeling my pain, but I would have preferred to live.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And again, just so much more we could talk about, and just a very fascinating conversation that I think we've had, and what we could have more in the future. But
Well, we will.
with that said, I have a few, I guess, final questions for you. Just a little bit. These will be a lot lighter, I promise. We don't have to worry too much about, but we'll wrap things up in like the next 5 or so minutes. So again, for you folks watching live, we'll be signing off in a little bit. So I guess the first question, I guess one we probably should have asked at the beginning, but what time frame do you have in terms of when Burden of Command will be released, or do you have one at the moment?
The goal is 2018.
Okay.
Now I've been definitely trying to do it. I've been coding forever, and I can promise you, after years of experience and sophisticated reasoning, that it's always 3 times longer for anything than I plan.
All right.
I will make one point. Why is that? Because psychologically, got a little brain here.
Yeah.
Reality is much more complex in our brains. We can never foresee that when I change the color on the font, it will cause a system problem that we never anticipated, and now I've got to solve that, right? So it's always going to take longer. It's not chance that game developers always take typically longer than they say, right? So who knows? But we're trying pretty hard for 2018. The writers are through. We're finishing off the narrative stuff right now. I'm pushing hard on the tactical. We have an engine that tries to trigger stories, dynamically based on what's going on in the battlefield. Oh, I don't know if that ever came out, but what happens in the battlefield narratively, there's flexibility. So if you don't go certain places, certain things won't happen. Certain things are sort of on the roll of the dice. Those of you who know board games and board game ambush, a little bit like that, right? So there's dynamics there. So it's coming along. We're pushing. 2018 is our goal.
All right. Do you have a retail price for the game yet?
Let me put it this way. I want it to be affordable, and we're gonna price it. So let me put it this way. The choice for me was to price it like a war game. And again, I don't think that this is a war game, though it draws heavily on a wargaming tradition for the battlefield. But again, simplifying in XCOM spirit. So we could have gone niche. So I'm answering as a business person right now. So one choice was I could have played it safe. I could have a higher price, and I'd get a certain niche audience, and we'd make enough pride to keep going. But my ambition is to reach a larger audience, because that's why I'm here for this. So and to tell these stories. So we're going to price it competitively with other kinds of games, like I've mentioned earlier. It's not going to be priced AAA or classic war games. It can be cheaper. And I mentioned some of the analogies, but I really don't want to commit myself to a price here.
Okay. Yeah, not a problem. In terms of platforms, are you going to be on Steam?
One last thing. Some people have suggested higher than I'm going to price it. But it's not going to be $1.99.
Okay. I guess. All right, that's good to know.
Go ahead.
For platforms, are you aiming for Steam, GOG, humble bundles?
Windows, Steam first, then eventually GOG, and what's the developer-focused one?
Itch.io?
Itch.io. And then if we're very successful, we might even think about more aggressive platforms. But start Steam, Windows.
All right. Well, I think, again, if I start thinking of more questions, we'll be here for another hour. So I'm not going to try and pitch anything more.
Great question.
For you, Luke.
Small of you.
Thank you. For you, Luke, do you have any final things? Like, is there anything we didn't bring up about Burden of Command? Anything at all regarding the design, the story, the historical context, anything like that we didn't talk about that you want to bring up before we wrap it up?
We did hit pretty well. Only other thing, there's some interesting design issues around storytelling. The only other one I mentioned, I'm seeing my notes that I wanted to mention. So we had Alexis Kennedy in. We did Sunless Sea early on, on Crucibles. He gave us some very interesting advice, which is a design debate. This is one where there's no right answer, and players have opinions. And whenever this comes up on social media, there's a debate. And the issue is transparency. What does that mean? Do we tell you the consequences of your action in advance, right? So one camp is a heavy role-playing immersive view. Not too surprising. I suspect that's a certain demographic who likes heavy immersion. And what they want is they don't want to know. right?
Mm-hmm.
They want to be there in a moment. They don't know what it means if they say, yeah, go ahead, or they say, no, don't do that, or whatever, right? So you don't tell them. The other camp says, look, you know, be transparent. Tell the player what the consequences are. You know, what's the cost if you do this? Do you lose trust or not? And Alexis Kennedy argues for transparency, and he argues for a couple reasons, and I think it's very interesting his answer. One reason, and I, by the way, we fall on the transparency side more than not.
Mm-hmm.
And first answer, which I agree with him, is kind of I came to my own conclusions. You know, I'm not doing a VR simulation of the battlefield. I can't show you the emotional expressions of the soldiers you're dealing with, right? Maybe Kingdom Come Deliverance can do more of that. I can't.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, I have to tell you more, right? Because I'm doing text and pictures and graphics and so forth. So I need to tell you more to be fair to the real situation. So that's an easy answer. But the more complex one, which I thought just was just such an interesting answer from Kennedy, was he said, if you make it transparent, you engage the players in the conversation about the decisions and what they should be, and you enable the community, right? If they can understand it and they can talk and they can give you feedback, then it becomes, you know, essentially you're communicating your philosophy on what the decisions are. So if we are transparent, relatively speaking, about the trust impact, you know, or the respect impact, then we're telling you what our world model is of how it works, and then you can make your own decision whether you agree or not, as opposed to we hide. You don't really know why. You guy turned around and spat in your face, right? So I thought that was a very interesting issue. Transparency, we fall on the side of transparency. Everything else saying close in a similar note, because I'm trying to point out things in the spirit of respect that people might not like.
Mm-hmm.
Not real time. You want a real-time game? This is not a real-time game. Okay, it's turn-based.
Yeah.
Another one is this is a chaos game, meaning, you know, one of the core things is the squads and the men may not do what you order. So there's a school of thought that really likes control, right? And that's fun. Chess, like, you know, Into the Breach. Sounds like it's going to be a fabulous game. They deliberately went down the design direction of there's no random chance.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds like it'll be a really great game. And it's getting a great reception. So that's a good way to go. That's not the way we're going. We're doing more XCOM. You know, the dice can go badly for you, right? And things don't go fairly. So war's pretty full of that. We're going to do a lot less in Real War. But I want people to understand, you know, just hate random. There's random.
Yeah, and again, oh man, we start talking about design choices here. I don't know how long we'll be. It'll probably be tomorrow at the time.
Another time.
Yeah. But yeah, that the transparency versus the narrative side. I mean, that is a very challenging topic because, again, as you said, it leads to different mindsets. If I know what someone's going to do, it's going to infer on my choice. But as you said, I think that was a really good point about you can't give the player everything from a narrative standpoint. You can't properly detail a player, okay, your troops are looking anxious at this point, so maybe that will affect trust. So you have to kind of, again, I guess
we don't tell you everything.
Yeah. You have to, like, quote unquote gamify it or abstract it for someone who's playing this game. And getting back to what you were saying earlier regarding UI design, that's another major point about how much do you show the player at any given moment. You can give them too much information that they just completely tune everything out, or you give them too little information, and then they're like, you know, I clicked this button, I don't know what happened. That's what happens with me when I play a lot of the Paradox games. I'm just pushing things on the screen.
It's very hard. Right, it's easy to say, which is right information at the right time, and extremely hard to do.
Of course, yes. But, oh man, I would definitely love to talk with you more, Luke, but yeah, we are almost at 2.5 hours in, so we better wrap things up before we both fall asleep.
I'll just say that I hope that my fondest hope is that the game will create these conversations about war and about leadership and the emotional experience, and also some of these design conversations for those who enjoy, you know, transparency and so forth, because, you know, then we can engage and we can improve.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, this has definitely been a fascinating chat, and I hope everyone watching this, either live or recorded, will enjoy. Yeah, they're still awake. Enjoy things. Here's one last quick question for you, Luke. For people who want to follow you or follow the game, if you wanted to bring back or re-mention the websites or Twitter, definitely feel free.
Thank you. I really appreciate that because, you know, in case any of you don't realize it, it's a horrific market for indies. I don't know how many. I think it's hundreds now titles a week. I mean, it's brutal. And if we don't get noticed, we die. Yeah. So, you know, talking to people and getting the word out is so key for us. Mm-hmm. So Therefore, please subscribe to our newsletter on the website. Also, come join us on Twitter. I'm there. Look every day. Respond. Facebook, we're there too. So those are our core, and it's at Burden of Command, pretty much in both places. So please come chat with us. Makes it worthwhile.
And your website is just burdenofcommand.com?
Burdencommand.com. Thank you. Yes.
All right.
And I hope you go look at the team. I'm so proud of the team. Really am. I mean, geez, they're pretty amazing. So go look at them. Pretty cool people, I think. And such an interesting mix.
Mm-hmm. All right. Again, this has definitely been one of my favorite casts I've had, I think, so far this year, and it has definitely been a pleasure talking to you, Luke.
Thank you.
Like I said, definitely don't be a stranger. I would love to have you back on. Again, there's just so many more topics, especially delving more into the psychology side when it comes to game design and UI design. I mean,
well, I was just looking over yours, I'm preparing for this, and a lot of talks I need to catch up on. I do listen to a fair amount of it, but there are a lot of good ones I realize I've missed, and you pointed out I've missed some Darkest Dungeons, so I'm going to go do my homework.
Awesome. But yeah, it has been fascinating. And again, if I didn't mention it, definitely the best of luck with wrapping up Burden of Command. And I hope to check it out when the game is getting nearer to completion.
Thank you, sir. Very much. And thanks, everyone.
Not a problem. So, that's a perfect time to...
Yeah, that must be a sign. At least the alarms didn't go off.
All right. So, with all that said, for you folks watching this live or recorded, we are going to wrap things up here. Again, thank you, Luke, for coming on. And for those of you watching, be sure to check out burdenofcommand.com and the game when it is released, hopefully, later in 2018. So,
and please spread the word. And if you didn't like what we said, tell me about that, too. We'll have a debate.
Awesome. So, for you folks watching this live, I will be back on probably in like an hour for some game streaming. I actually did pick up Into the Breach today, so I'm excited to jump in.
You have a lot of energy. I've noticed that. I'm impressed how much you produce.
It's a very weird mix of energy. Sometimes I can do a lot, other times it just feels like I'm barely moving at all.
Scare me a little bit.
Yeah. But I will be back on later tonight. For you folks watching this recorded, if you would like an ad-free version of this talk and have it earlier, check out patreon.com/GWBicer to support Game Wisdom and get access to our VIP editions of our chats. So, my voice is about to die now, so I will wrap things up here. Thanks again for tuning in, and I will see you guys for another Developer Livecast. Oh, one last thing I almost forgot. If you are a developer watching this who would like to come on for a cast, whether to discuss topics or their game, please don't hesitate to get in touch. I'm always looking for new guests, and if we can do at least one Developer Livecast a week, I know I've done my job. So, with that said, thanks for tuning in. Once again, check out Burden of Command, and have a great rest of the night, and I'll see you all next time. Till then, take care.